Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Scary Stories channel, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. There was a time when the Blackmore estate stood proud, its halls echoing with the laughter of nobility and the music of indulgence. But that time was long dead, much like the soil it sat upon. The locals called it cursed land, a place where the earth refused to bear fruit, and the nights whispered of things that thirsted beneath the ground. Yet the estate still stood, a decaying monument of a forgotten past, its stone walls choking on ivy and shadow. Michael Carter had inherited the estate by blood, an unwelcome gift from an uncle he barely remembered. The old man had died quietly, alone, in one of the upper rooms. His body wasn't discovered until the smell seeped through the wooden floors and forced the walls to confess. The will was clear. The estate belonged to Michael now, a detail he hadn't cared for until Rachel Quinn reminded him that an inheritance of such size wasn't to be discarded. And so Michael gathered his friends for a weekend retreat. A reunion of sorts: Tyler Briggs with his reckless jokes, Owen Mercer with his brooding silence, Sasha Lane who flirted with shadows, Rachel Quinn the realist with eyes sharp as blades, and Emily Harper, Michael's former flame, whose presence stirred old wounds he'd long thought healed. The journey there was marked with hesitation. As they drove through the village bordering the estate, the locals watched with eyes hollowed by fear. No one smiled. A hunched old woman stood by the roadside, lips moving without sound, crossing herself as their van rumbled past. Tyler waved, mocking the gesture, but her eyes remained fixed ahead, unblinking as though watching not them, but something that followed just beyond their vision. The Blackmore estate greeted them like a patient predator. Tall iron gates twisted into thorn patterns, the stone manor behind them cloaked in ivy that crawled like veins over a dying body. The air grew colder the closer they drew, as if the sun had decided the estate did not deserve its warmth. Rachel scoffed when they stepped onto the grounds. "It's a graveyard," she said, "not a home." The wind carried no argument. Inside, the estate was worse than expected. Walls cracked like old skin, paintings sagged and yellowed. Dust clung to everything, and the air was thick, not just with age but with something stagnant, something still. A smell faint but persistent, damp mold, and under it all, the sweet iron of blood too old to remember itself. Yet Tyler joked through it all, slapping the walls, declaring himself lord of the manor. "If these walls could talk," he chuckled, "they'd probably beg for company." None laughed, but he didn't seem to notice. By nightfall, they had chosen their rooms. Emily's was nearest to Michael, though neither spoke of it. Rachel claimed the library to sleep in, her excuse being the more fortified walls, but truthfully, the books made her feel less alone. Owen, always the loner, selected a small chamber under the eaves where the air was thinnest, and Sasha had asked for the basement. They had laughed, thinking she was joking, but she insisted. Something about the silence down there felt peaceful to her, she said. The joke died on their lips when she walked down the rotted stairs and didn't come back until the next morning. Yet the true beginning of their horror did not come with Sasha's descent, but with what the house kept in its belly. It was the second night when Tyler, searching for wine or at least a story to tell, dragged Michael and Emily down into the depths of the wine cellar. The stone steps spiraled down like a broken spine, the air growing colder, heavier. The torches they lit flickered with every breath of the estate, as if the house itself exhaled through the walls. They found wine, yes, but they also found something else. A wall unlike the others. Black stone veined with red mineral streaks, a surface cold and smooth, humming under touch. A mural carved with exquisite and grotesque detail. A woman seated on a throne of bones, her eyes gemstone red, mouth agape and fanged, cradling what appeared to be a newborn, though the child was skeletal, its ribs visible. its mouth open in a scream that echoed through centuries. Emily touched the wall despite Michael's protest. The stone was warm beneath her fingers, and then it pulsed. Just once, a heartbeat deep and resonant. The torches all guttered at once, and for a breath the cellar went black. When the flames reignited, the mural was different. The woman's eyes, once dull stone, now shimmered wet and red. The child in her arms was gone. They left then, pretending nothing had changed. But that pulse, that singular heartbeat, had carried through the estate like a ripple on dead water. And in the crypt below, where earth met stone in a hidden chamber, her eyes opened. She stretched, her bones creaking against the confines of her tomb, flesh stitching itself back together in strands of shadow and blood. Her name, though forgotten by most, remained etched in the marrow of the house. Lilith Blackmore, the Lady of Blood. The next morning, Sasha was not herself. She appeared at breakfast, face pale but eyes bright, too bright. She smiled too easily, too widely, and her eyes lingered on Emily a fraction too long. Her skin was cold, yet she claimed to be warm. No one spoke of it, but all felt it. Something was wrong with Sasha, though none could say how. That night the dreams began. Michael dreamt of a woman in red silk, her mouth a wound of teeth, calling his name sweetly, promising pleasures too sharp to be love. Tyler awoke screaming, claiming he saw a woman standing over him, her eyes like twin moons bleeding light. Emily began sleepwalking, her footsteps leading her to the basement before Rachel caught her. Only Owen watched silently, noting every change, every shadow that didn't belong, every reflection that moved when it shouldn't. He watched Sasha most of all, and he knew something had taken root in her. The house itself seemed to change. Doors led to places they shouldn't, mirrors reflected rooms they'd never seen, and at night the sounds came. Wet sounds like lips parting from flesh, like bones cracking under gentle hands. Footsteps where no one walked. Whispers too close to the ear, speaking in a tongue no human had claimed to. Rachel found a book in the library, leather-bound, pages brittle and inked with blood. It spoke of the Lady of Blackmore, a noblewoman who had lived centuries ago, rumored to be immortal, drinking the blood of children and lovers alike to sustain her beauty. The villagers had sealed her away, not with wood or stone, but with a curse spoken by dying mouths. But curses decay, and blood awakens. By the fourth night, Tyler vanished. One moment he was drinking in the parlor, the next he was gone, his cup tipped and blood spattered on the carpet in a bloom of crimson. They searched, shouting his name, but the house swallowed sound like a mouth. Owen suggested the basement, but Sasha argued, claiming she'd been there. Empty, she said, just wine and dust. Yet when night fell again, Tyler's voice echoed from the halls, but distorted, wet, like his throat had been torn and stitched anew. Come down, it's beautiful down here. She's waiting. Fear took root. They barricaded the doors, lit every candle they could find. Still, the dark pressed in, thick as oil. Michael couldn't sleep. He stood by the window and watched the night, saw the mist that crept along the ground like living things. And there by the tree line he saw her, Lilith, her form half shadow, half flesh, her eyes red coals burning through the mist. She raised a hand, not in greeting but in command. And Emily, still asleep, rose from her bed and began to walk, her eyes closed, mouth whispering a name not hers. It was only Rachel's scream that broke the spell. They caught Emily before she could step outside, but she fought them, her voice layered with another beneath it, a woman's voice, old and full of hunger. The house was awake now. The friends, fractured and afraid, understood then that something beneath their feet had stirred, and it would not let them leave. But the worst revelation came with Owen, standing over Sasha as she slept, watching her mouth twitch, her hands curl like claws. And when her eyes snapped open, glowing faintly red, she smiled with a mouth that was not hers. "You should have let me sleep," she whispered. The estate did not sleep after that night. Not truly. It watched with walls that pulsed, with floors that sighed beneath every step, its corridors like veins through which something ancient flowed again. Sasha Lane was the first evidence that something had gone wrong. She moved differently now, not sluggish or overtly monstrous, but smooth, silent, her steps too soundless, her presence too cold. Her smiles no longer reached her eyes, and when she stared at the others, it was as if she were counting them like sheep for slaughter. Rachel watched her closely. She had always trusted her instincts, and they now screamed in the back of her mind. But suspicion alone was a poor defense in a house that bred lies. Tyler Briggs remained missing. His voice, however, did not. At night, his laughter echoed through the halls, warped and hollow. Sometimes it was just around the corner, other times beneath the floorboards. They called out to him, their voices trembling, but what answered was not Tyler. Instead, it was the wet sound of breathing too deep, too heavy, as though lungs unused to air strained to remember how to inhale. Emily Harper was the next to change. Her skin grew pale, her dreams became worse. She spoke in her sleep, muttering words in languages that made the listener's ears itch. Michael watched over her, helpless, recalling the touch of her hand in happier days, now replaced by the cold grip of her fevered body. One morning, they found a trail of blood smeared across the hallway, leading back down to the cellar. They followed it, each step resisting the pull of fear that screamed for them to turn back. Downstairs, the cellar was no longer a place for wine. The air was heavier, sick with rot and iron. The black stone mural had changed yet again. Now the woman on the throne stood, arms open, her mouth parted in a grin of too many teeth. At her feet knelt shapes, people perhaps, but eyeless, mouth stitched shut. It was Owen who noticed the final detail. The eyes of the kneeling figures glowed faint red in the torchlight. "There are 6, Owen whispered. "There were 5 before." Michael's breath caught. "That's Tyler." But there was no time to argue, for movement stirred in the dark corners of the cellar. A figure, broken, twisted, crawled from the shadows. Tyler. But his eyes shone crimson, his mouth slack and torn at the corners, a smile that split his cheeks too wide. "You stayed," he gurgled, voice stitched together with malice. "She's pleased." Rachel raised the iron poker she'd brought from the fireplace and stepped forward, but Sasha stopped her with a hand on the arm. Her grip was iron, her smile thin. "Let him speak," Sasha whispered, her voice rich with something not her own. "He brings her greetings." Michael stared at Sasha, realization dawning but fear pinning his limbs. "What did you do, Sasha?" But Sasha only smiled. "I was chosen. I saw her while you all slept. She promised eternity. I accepted." Tyler laughed then, a bubbling, choked sound as if his lungs were filled with tar. "She's almost ready. The house remembers her, the ground feeds her, and soon, so will you." Then Tyler lunged, his movement sudden, his body bending in ways no human should. Rachel swung the poker, striking his temple with a sickening crack, but Tyler barely flinched. Owen tackled him next, fists pounding, but Tyler's strength was unnatural. He tossed Owen aside like paper, and the man hit the stone wall with a wet thud, unmoving. Rachel, with a scream more rage than fear, struck again, this time driving the poker into Tyler's eye. The creature howled not in pain but in frustration, and as the iron lodged deeper, his body convulsed, smoke curling from the wound. The group dragged Owen's limp form upstairs, Sasha laughing all the while, her hands clasped like a child watching her favorite story unfold. That night Owen remained unconscious, his breath shallow but present. The rest of them gathered in the library, Rachel packing, Michael silent, Emily curled up by the fireplace shivering and whispering to herself. Rachel slammed the book she'd been reading onto the table. "This isn't just a ghost," she snapped. "This is older, a vampire." Michael shook his head. "Vampires don't exist." Rachel's glare was sharp. Then what's in the basement, Mike? What's wearing Tyler's face? The book spoke of Lilith Blackmore, the Lady of Blood, sealed centuries ago by villagers who had traded their lives to bind her beneath the estate. They used iron, salt, and blood rites, but time wore away all things, even curses. She's not just a vampire, Rachel whispered. She's a goddamn queen of them. Meanwhile, Sasha sat alone in her room, humming to herself, brushing her hair with slow, methodical strokes. In the mirror, her reflection was wrong. It smiled wider, the eyes deeper red, the mouth hungrier. She whispered to it. Soon they'll all join us. As the night deepened, the house stirred. Doors that had been locked were now ajar. The mirrors began to fog with breath that wasn't theirs. Footsteps padded through the halls, some heavy, some small, like children chasing in the dark. Michael couldn't sleep. He stood guard by Emily's side, watching her fever break into whispers of Lilith's name. Her skin was turning cold, her veins darkening beneath it. At midnight, the estate groaned, a low, rumbling sound like a beast waking from slumber. The walls seemed to shift, elongating hallways, stretching spaces that were once small. The air reeked of copper and mildew. Michael woke Rachel. "We can't stay," he said. Rachel nodded, she'd known it too. "But the estate won't let us leave." Morning came, or so the clocks claimed, yet no sun breached the curtains. The sky remained a dull gray, as if dawn itself refused to touch this cursed land. They tried to leave. The gates stood open, mocking. Yet every road led them back to the estate as though the world itself had folded in on them. Trees became walls, the path spiraled, and eventually, without realizing, they stood once again before the manor doors, the house waiting like a spider for its prey. Owen woke briefly, his eyes bloodshot, his words slurred. She's under us, hungry, she's calling the roots. The soil listens." Emily's condition worsened. Her veins darkened like ink in water, her teeth began to ache, and her eyes flickered red in certain lights. She was turning. Rachel pressed Michael hard. "If she turns, she'll kill us." But Michael refused to abandon her. He searched the journals left by his uncle, the same uncle who died here, and found scribbled notes of desperation. A ritual blade existed, forged of silver mixed with consecrated iron, hidden within the estate, the only weapon capable of killing Lilith. But to find it, they would have to descend again, deeper than the wine cellar, deeper than the crypt. That night Sasha watched them from the shadows, her laughter soft and cold. "She waits, you'll see. We all will see." Rachel armed herself with salt and iron, dragging Owen with them despite his weakness. Emily, half awake, her skin graying, was carried by Michael. The air itself seemed alive, whispering promises and threats. They descended once more, beyond the wine cellar, breaking through rotted boards that hid a stairwell of stone slick with moisture and time. The deeper they went, the louder the heartbeat, slow, steady, like a drum beneath the world. They reached the chamber, bones littered the ground, skulls crushed underfoot, and at the center stood a pedestal, atop which lay the ritual blade, its surface tarnished but still humming with dormant power. But the moment they touched it, the chamber awoke. Figures stepped from the walls eyeless, their bodies stitched, their mouths sealed Lilith's children, the forgotten souls who served her in death. Sasha stood among them, her eyes red, her mouth bleeding from the corners. "Welcome," she whispered. "She's ready to rise." And then the walls screamed, the air filling with the sound of flesh tearing, of hunger waking. The friends stood surrounded, the blade in hand, yet uncertain if it would be enough. And above them the house shuddered, for Lilith Blackmore was stirring, her hunger now fully awake, and her first feast awaited. The air in the crypt stank of rot and dampness, the walls slick with centuries of moisture and blood both old and fresh. The sound of their own breath echoed too loudly in the confined space, mixing with the subtle noise of shuffling feet, not their own, but others, unseen but closing in. Michael Carter held the ritual blade tight in his hand, its weight cold and unnatural, as though the metal itself rejected mortal touch. Beside him, Rachel Quinn stood rigid, her makeshift iron poker trembling slightly in her grip. Owen Mercer, still weak and bruised from his last encounter, leaned heavily on the wall, eyes glassy yet trying to stay focused. At their feet, Emily Harper stirred faintly, her fevered body shivering violently, sweat coating her pale skin. The veins on her arms and neck had blackened further, creeping like vines beneath her flesh. Her breathing was shallow, but the real terror came from her eyes. They flickered open briefly, and within them glimmered a faint but distinct shade of red. They had little time. Surrounding them, the eyeless, mouth-sewn thralls of Lilith Blackmore waited in stillness, their heads tilted like curious animals assessing prey. And at the center of this living nightmare stood Sasha Lane, her once familiar features now tainted by a predatory grace. Her smile was serene, a mockery of the warmth she once shared with her friends. "You came this far," Sasha whispered, her voice layered as though another being spoke with her. "All for a blade, but blades don't kill hunger, they only feed it." Michael's voice was hollow with disbelief. "Why, Sasha, why betray us?" She tilted her head, a strand of dark hair falling over one eye which glowed faintly. "Because she offered me a place where the night never ends, where I'll never be weak or alone again." Rachel snarled, stepping forward. "You're already alone." Without warning, one of the thralls lunged, its sewn mouth splitting at the seams with a wet tear, exposing teeth that no corpse should have. Rachel swung the iron poker hard, smashing its head aside with a crack, but more advanced. Michael gripped the ritual blade and slashed, the silver edge cutting through the air with a low hum. When it struck the thrall's neck, the result was immediate. The creature shrieked, smoke pouring from the wound, and crumpled to ash. They fought savagely, Michael slicing through another while Rachel battered another down, her poker now bent and bloodied. Owen tried to fight, but weakness overtook him, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping. Sasha watched with amusement, her eyes drinking in their struggle like fine wine. But then Emily stirred again, this time rising to her knees, her body trembling violently. She looked up, and her lips curled back in a snarl, her eyes burning red. Rachel froze. "Mike, she's turning." Emily's voice was hoarse, layered wrong. "Feed, I need to feed." Michael dropped to her side, cradling her face. "Emily, fight it, stay with me." But she shoved him back with unnatural strength, her nails raking across his chest, leaving bleeding gashes. Sasha stepped forward, smiling. "Let her go, Michael, she's already mine." Rachel lunged at Sasha, swinging the poker, but Sasha moved faster, inhumanly fast, catching the weapon mid-swing and twisting it from Rachel's grip. "Always so brave, Rachel," Sasha whispered, "but bravery tastes bitter." Sasha sank her teeth into Rachel's shoulder, blood spurting as Rachel screamed, trying to push her away. But Sasha held tight, feeding hungrily, her body shuddering with ecstasy. Michael, driven by panic and rage, charged with the ritual blade, driving it into Sasha's side. She shrieked, the sound piercing as smoke and blood erupted from the wound. She stumbled back, hissing, her mouth smeared red. Rachel collapsed, pale and gasping, blood pooling beneath her. Sasha, wounded but not slain, retreated into the shadows, her voice still dripping with cruel laughter. Soon you'll all serve her." The thralls, leaderless for now, fell back, disappearing into the black corners of the crypt. The immediate danger passed, but their wounds ran deeper than flesh. Michael rushed to Rachel's side, tearing his shirt to bind her wound. She was conscious but fatting, her skin clammy. Owen, barely upright, whispered weakly. She's in us in the blood. Rachel's infected. Rachel, teeth clenched in pain, stared at Michael. If I turn, you kill me. Michael shook his head, refusing the thought, but the truth was written on the walls, in the air, in every heartbeat. Emily sat slumped, her eyes dulling, the hunger within her momentarily sated by the proximity of blood, yet still festering. She wept without sound, her body torn between who she was and what she was becoming. They returned to the surface, the blade in hand, the price of it heavy on their shoulders. The estate seemed darker now, the walls closing tighter, the shadows longer. Upstairs, Rachel rested, her wound dressed but infected with more than just the bite. Her dreams were filled with whispers, promises of power, eternal life, and release from pain. The infection was in her blood, her mind. The turning had begun. Michael sat by Emily, who stared at nothing, her skin pallid, her voice distant. She's in my head, Emily whispered. She calls to me, I can feel her, beneath us. She's waking. Michael gripped her hand, feeling the chill. I'll save you, I swear. Owen, fragile but still thinking, pored over the journals again. There's a chance, he said. If we kill Lilith before the turning completes, it might stop the spread, but if not, they'll be hers forever. Michael nodded grimly. The blade was their only hope. That night they heard footsteps again, Tyler's broken laughter, Sasha's seductive whispers, and something else, a low, guttural breathing that shook the walls. In the parlor mirror, a reflection not their own stared back, a woman draped in red, her eyes twin lanterns of blood, her smile sharp and endless. Lilith Blackmore was awake. She spoke, though her mouth did not move. The words crawled into their minds like worms. Come to me, children. The night is long and you are so sweet. The air grew colder. The walls wept moisture, like the house itself cried in fear of its mistress. Rachel's condition worsened. Her veins blackened, her teeth aching, her dreams a theater of carnage where she feasted upon her friends, laughing in delight. Michael knew time was running thin. They could not wait for the dawn. They had to go back into the crypt, into the heart of the estate, to end Lilith Blackmore before she claimed them all. But Emily's eyes flashed red again. She gripped Michael's wrist, her nails digging deep. What if I don't want to be saved? She whispered. Michael recoiled, horror dawning anew. The hunger had her. He could see it now in her trembling hands, in her licking lips. The first turning had begun. And in the darkness beneath the earth, Lilith Blackmore smiled, feeling her children grow strong, her hunger ever deeper. Morning never truly came to the Blackmore estate anymore. Though the clocks insisted time passed, the sky outside remained locked in a dull gray, as if the sun had turned its back on the land. Inside the manor, the air grew heavier with each hour, walls appearing damp, mirrors fogged by breath not their own. The house was awake, and so was she, Lilith Blackmore. Michael Carter stood at the window, watching the dead horizon, knowing in his bones that no help would come. Every attempt to leave had brought them back to these cursed halls, the land itself betraying direction, path, and hope. Behind him, Rachel Quinn lay still on the couch, her skin pale, lips cracked. The wound on her shoulder festered, dark veins reaching outward from the bite. She muttered names in her fever, Michael, Owen, Emily, but they were tangled with words in an older tongue, one no living person should know. Emily Harper sat nearby, watching Rachel with hollow eyes. The red in her gaze flickered on and off, her transformation slow but sure. She clutched her stomach, whispering to herself, waging a war inside her veins between hunger and humanity. Owen Mercer, frail and bruised, read through the crumbling journals left behind by Michael's uncle. Pages stained with blood and ink told of the ritual blade, but also of the cult that once served Lilith, a gathering of aristocrats who fed her victims in exchange for eternal youth. But they had failed her. and she had feasted on them instead. Then there was Sasha Lane gone into the crypt, her betrayal undeniable. She had joined the hunger willingly. But there was one more still missing, Tyler Briggs. The laughter had returned that evening. Tyler's voice echoed through the halls, not joyful but strained, broken, like a puppet forced to grin. The sound grew louder closer until footsteps announced his arrival. He stood at the parlor entrance, his body visibly wrong, limbs slightly too long, joints moving just slightly askew. His eyes were pits of red light, and his smile stretched ear to ear, the skin at the corners scarred from holding the grin. "Miss me," he croaked. Michael rose, holding the ritual blade. "You're not him." Tyler chuckled, head tilting unnaturally. "Oh, it's me, all right. I remember the laughs, the beers, but I remember her more." Rachel stirred at the sound of his voice, opening her eyes sluggishly. She whispered, "Tyler." He grinned wider. "Still got that poker face, Ratch." Michael moved between Tyler and the others, blade ready. "You've been turned." Tyler nodded slowly, bones audibly cracking in his neck. "And it's glorious. I can hear her, feel her. She's in everything, in the wood, in the stone, in your blood." "Why come back?" Michael asked. Tyler stepped closer. "Because she asked me to. She wants to offer you a deal, Mike. You and Rachel join her. Live forever, no more fear." Michael spat on the floor. "Never." Tyler's grin faded slightly. "Pity," then she says, "we start the feast." With a growl, Tyler lunged. Michael swung the blade, catching Tyler's arm, the silver burned, smoke hissing from the wound. Tyler howled, retreating into the hall, his laugh trailing behind. But in that brief encounter, Michael knew Tyler had marked their hiding place. The house was closing in. Owen spoke hurriedly. "She knows where we are. We have to move. The journals, they mention a hidden path beneath the library leading deeper. That's where her heart sleeps." Rachel moaned on the couch, shivering violently, her veins now black rivers beneath her skin. I won't be me much longer." Michael knelt by her, face pained. She gripped his arm. "If I turn, you kill me. Promise me." Michael couldn't answer. The promise was too heavy. They gathered what little they could, salt, broken iron bars, the blade. Rachel, barely able to stand, insisted on walking. "I want to see her face before I die." Emily followed silently, her eyes half-lidded, fighting her turning. The library stood cold and cavernous, the fireplace long dead. Owen pried a loose bookshelf aside, revealing a hidden stair descending into blackness. As they prepared to descend, Tyler's voice returned nearer, clearer. "Run, run, little rats," he sang. "She's waking, and she's hungry." Behind Tyler's voice came others, soft at first, then louder. Whispers, shrieks, sobs, a chorus of the damned that filled every crack of the house. They descended, torches flickering, shadows dancing like mockery on the walls. The staircase spiraled deep beneath the earth, farther than the wine cellar, deeper than the crypt. The air changed, damp, sour, thick with the smell of blood and decay. The walls here were bone, human bones mortared together with mud and ash. They reached the bottom, an ancient hall, cavernous and grotesque. At its center stood an altar, stone slick with old blood, and on it a blackened heart, still faintly beating. This was her resting place. Her heart remained separate from her body, sealed by the cult that tried to contain her. But the seal was failing, cracks spidered through the altar, the heart pulsing faster. Rachel collapsed, coughing violently, blood pouring from her mouth. She grabbed Michael's hand. "End it, enter, before I—" But her voice changed, deeper, alien. Her eyes shot open, fully red. Rachel screamed, but it wasn't her scream. It was Lilith speaking through her, the sound shaking the bones of the chamber. "I see you." Rachel convulsed violently, bones cracking, body twitching unnaturally. The turning was complete. Michael, tears streaming, raised the blade. "Forgive me." He drove it through her heart. Rachel gasped, her red eyes wide, then softened. She smiled faintly, her humanity returning for a second. "Thank you," she whispered before the life left her, her body falling still. Emily fell to her knees, sobbing. Owen stared at the heart on the altar. "We have to destroy it, now." Michael approached, raising the blade, but the chamber trembled. From the shadows, Sasha emerged, her eyes burning red, her mouth stained with blood. "You're too late," she whispered. And then Lilith herself emerged, not fully flesh, but shadow, smoke, and the suggestion of a woman draped in blood and silk, her eyes glowing twin suns of red. Her voice was everywhere, inside them. "You killed my daughter, the brave one." Michael stood firm. "We'll kill you too." Lilith laughed, soft, feminine, terrifying. "You can try." The chamber erupted in movement. Tyler, now fully monstrous, charged with impossible speed. Sasha flanked them, a blur of teeth and claws. Owen tossed a pouch of salt into the air, the grains sparkling like stars, momentarily halting Tyler. Michael swung the blade, severing Tyler's arm, the limb dissolving into ash, but Tyler fought on, unfeeling. Emily, tears streaking her face, screamed and tackled Sasha, her body shaking, barely human but still resisting. Owen yelled, "The heart!" stabbed the heart. Michael turned, racing to the altar, but Lilith's shadow form loomed, her claws inches from his back. Then Emily screamed, not in pain, but in fury, her humanity blazing for a moment. She grabbed Sasha, holding her in place. "Do it, Mike." Michael plunged the blade deep into the blackened heart. The chamber shook violently, the heart shrieking, a sound not made by flesh but by something older, deeper. The beating stopped, the heart crumbled to ash. Lilith shrieked, her shadow body burning with white cracks, her form unraveling. "No, no, I am eternal, I am the night." But the blade had undone her. The ground shook, walls cracking, the bones crumbling. Sasha screamed as Emily tore into her, and both collapsed into dust and shadow. Tyler fell, his body rotting away in seconds, his grin finally breaking. Lilith's form disintegrated into smoke, her final cry fading into a low moan, swallowed by the collapsing chamber. Silence. Only Michael, Owen, and Emily remained, though Emily's eyes still shimmered faintly red, her turning incomplete. Owen gasped, bloody but alive. "Is it over?" Michael stared at the ashes. "I don't know." But the ground trembled once more. The house above groaned as if angry, the hunger not entirely dead. The betrayal had cost them dearly. Rachel, Tyler, Sasha, all gone. And yet beneath their feet, somewhere deeper, something still stirred, waiting. The Blackmore estate shook with a hunger that would not die. Though Lilith Blackmore's heart had been turned to ash, the air did not lighten, nor did the walls cease their trembling. Instead, the darkness deepened, thick as tar, resisting every breath. Michael Carter stood over the crumbled altar, the ritual blade slick with blackened blood and ash. Around him, the chamber bore the weight of centuries of death. Piles of bones, ossified long ago, now seemed to breathe with the low pulse of something still alive beneath their feet. Owen Mercer leaned against the crumbling wall, his body battered, breath shallow but steady. His mind, always sharper than his bones, tried to make sense of it all, flipping through the shattered pages of the journals they'd brought down. But the ink bled, the pages torn, as though the words themselves wanted to forget. And then there was Emily Harper, still alive, but barely. She knelt beside the altar, her head hung low, her hair like a veil over her face. Her skin had not healed, the veins still traced black beneath her flesh, and her eyes still shimmered faintly with crimson light. She's still here, Emily whispered. I can hear her. Michael turned sharply. We destroyed her heart. Emily shook her head, trembling. That was only the lock. She's deeper, deeper than this. She's been feeding off the estate, the land, the dead, the heart. That was just a chain. The ground moaned beneath them, a deep, hollow sound like lungs inhaling stale air. The walls of bone shifted, and behind the altar, a fissure opened in the earth, a wound splitting the world itself. From it came noxious air, foul with rot, wet with the scent of earth turned by old hands. Beyond the crack was blackness, total and devouring. Owen looked up from the torn journal. The journal said the cult never truly sealed her, only divided her essence. The heart was the first part, but her body, her soul, they're still here, deeper. Michael stared into the fissure. The way forward was clear, though it promised only pain. Emily raised her face. Her lips trembled, her eyes red and wet. I have to go. Michael knelt before her. No, you'll stay here. You're not strong enough. Emily shook her head. She's in me. I can feel her. I can guide you. Without me, you won't find her. She won't let you. The decision was made, unspoken, heavy. Together, the three of them stepped into the fissure, swallowed by the earth. The tunnel was not carved by tools, but by something older, clawed, wet, and alive. The walls pulsed, faintly breathing, as though the earth itself was a lung. Every step deeper was a surrender to madness. The air thickened, space grew uncertain, sometimes wide and cavernous, other times narrow enough that shoulders scraped bone and stone. And then came the voices. Soft at first, then louder, familiar voices, mocking, pleading, accusing. Owen heard his mother's voice, long dead, whispering that he was always the weak one, always the burden. She listed every failure, every moment of cowardice. Emily heard laughter, her own, distorted and cruel, mocking her for thinking she could escape the hunger inside her. Michael heard Rachel. You let me die, Mike, I begged you. He shook his head violently, pressing forward, but her voice persisted, a bleeding wound in his memory. The tunnel widened into a chamber of stone. Here, the air was colder, the walls wet with moisture that was not water. Stalactites dripped red. At the center, a crude stone circle, carved with symbols older than language. In the middle stood a figure. It was Michael's uncle, the man whose death had given Michael the estate. He stood swaying slightly, eyes hollow. Michael, the figure rasped, you should have stayed away. Michael raised the blade, unsure if this was real. Owen whispered, it's not him, it's her, don't listen. The figure smiled, its mouth too wide, stretching its face. She's waiting, Michael. She remembers you. You carry her blood. Did you know? Our family bound her here. Your line is the reason she sleeps. Michael's stomach churned. Yes, the figure sneered. We were the wardens, but we got lazy, careless, and now she wakes, and she is hungry. The figure lunged, but Michael was faster. The blade slashed, cutting deep. The illusion crumpled, the body collapsing into dust and bone. The path forward opened, another tunnel steeper, darker. Emily groaned, clutching her head. She knows we're coming, she's ready. Their torchlight flickered but did not die, leading them deeper still until the air became unbreathable, a suffocation of shadow. At last they reached it, the true crypt. A cavern beneath the world, so vast they could not see its ceiling. Monolithic stone pillars carved with faces of agony held up the black sky. In the center was a throne of bones, massive, imposing. Upon it sat Lilith Blackmore. Her body was now whole, tall, impossibly graceful, her skin pale as death, her hair a river of black silk. Her eyes opened, twin orbs of red, burning like dying suns. She smiled. You've come at last. Her voice was music and murder, every word a caress and a curse. You killed my heart, clever, But the heart is nothing without the mind, and I am still very much alive. Michael stepped forward, raising the blade. Lilith's smile widened. That little toy, that won't save you. I remember your bloodline, Michael. It was your ancestor who sealed me here. He paid the price, so will you. She stood, her form shifting, flesh melting into shadow and back again. Her presence crushed the air itself. Join me, she offered. I can grant you life beyond life. Your friends can live. Emily will be cured. I can be merciful. Michael faltered for a moment. Then he shook his head. I watched you take everything. I'll end you. Lilith sighed. Then you'll die screaming. She raised her hands, and from the dark her children emerged, the dead, the forgotten, the victims. They crawled from the bone piles, eyeless, mouths wide, shrieking without sound. The final battle began. Michael fought, the ritual blade slicing through the thralls, each kill a burst of smoke and shadow. Owen, frail but desperate, used what iron he could, stabbing, breaking bone, defending Emily. Emily stood still, trembling, hearing Lilith inside her, the voice louder, angrier. Join me, child, become mine fully. But Emily screamed, clutching her head, resisting. Michael reached the throne, Lilith waiting, her eyes pitying. She caught his swing easily, her strength immense. I cannot be killed by a blade alone, she whispered. But Michael smiled grimly. I know. Owen, from behind, scattered salt in a circle around the throne, completing the ward his ancestor had once drawn. The ground hissed, smoke rising. Lilith faltered. What have you done? Michael shoved the blade through her stomach, not the heart, but the gut, pinning her to the throne. The salt glowed, the air burning. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite her red eyes. I banish you, by blood, by bone, by the night you've stolen. Lilith screamed, a sound that split the earth. Her form burned, cracking, her shadow peeling away. I am eternal. But the ward held. Her body crumbled, her shadow burnt away, her voice fading into a howl swallowed by the deep. And then silence. The ground shook, the cavern collapsing. Michael grabbed Owen, dragging him away, Emily stumbling after. They ran, the tunnels falling behind them, the estate's belly devouring itself. At last they burst from the fissure, into the crypt, into the manor. Just as the house began to crack and sink, the Blackmore estate crumbling, pulled into the ground like a carcass claimed by worms. When the dust settled, the house was gone, only earth and ash remained. Michael, Owen, and Emily stood, gasping, filthy, alive. Emily's eyes no longer red, her veins clearing. Is it over? Owen asked. Michael looked at the ruin. For now. But deep beneath, in places no human could reach, something still watched. And waited. The Blackmore estate was gone, swallowed by the earth itself, leaving behind nothing but a stretch of dead soil, ashen and lifeless. Where once a grand manor stood, only a gaping scar remained, a sunken hollow as if the land had exhaled a final breath and then caved inward to bury the memory. Michael Carter stood at the edge of the pit, staring into the abyss. The morning sky hung dull and gray, but at last light existed again. Not sunlight in its true form, but a weak, fragile dawn that seemed to test the horizon, hesitant to reclaim the cursed ground. Owen Mercer sat nearby, his body exhausted, skin marred with bruises, his breathing labored. He watched the ruin, eyes vacant, mind hollowed by all he'd witnessed. Beside them, Emily Harper rested. Her skin, once pallid and veined in black, was slowly clearing. The red from her eyes had vanished, though deep shadows remained beneath them, reminders that part of her still remembered the hunger. They had survived. At least, that's what they told themselves. But survival was no mercy. The ground trembled faintly, as if the earth still shifted below. The sky remained heavy, the air unmoving, like breath held in a throat too frightened to exhale. Michael turned to Owen. "Is it over?" Owen said nothing. He just stared, eyes blank, lips slightly parted, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Emily stirred weakly. "I still feel her. She's not dead." Michael knelt beside her, grasping her hand. "We destroyed her." Emily shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "We destroyed her body, we broke her heart, but her voice, it's in me, she's still watching." Michael's chest tightened. He wanted to believe it was over, wanted to believe that the nightmare had ended, that the sun would rise and they would leave this place. But the sky told him otherwise. Then came the sound, soft at first, like a breeze, but no wind stirred. A voice on the air, a whisper too low to understand yet impossible to ignore. Owen's eyes widened. He whispered, "She's not below us anymore." A chill settled over them. From the pit, a shape began to form, not solid but smoke, shadow, and whispers. It gathered like a storm, coalescing into a figure. Lilith Blackmore, no longer flesh, no longer confined to bone and blood, but a wraith of herself, her silhouette feminine, tall, her eyes twin coals of burning hatred. Her voice rang clear, a resonance that vibrated through their bones. "You thought death could contain me." Michael raised the ritual blade, tarnished, stained, but still humming faintly with power. Lilith drifted forward, her feet not touching the ground. "Steel and salt are for flesh, Michael. I have no need for flesh anymore." She raised her hand and the ground cracked. From the soil, skeletal hands emerged, the remains of her children, summoned again in shadow form. Owen staggered up, barely able to stand, yet defiant. "We ended you." Lilith laughed, a sound hollow and endless. "You ended a body, but I am not a body, I am hunger. I am the shadow between heartbeats. I am the night that never dies." Emily cried out, clutching her head, Lilith's voice piercing into her mind. Michael stood firm, blade ready. "How do we kill you?" Lilith's eyes gleamed. "You don't, you join me." Her shadow children crawled forth, skeletal, eyeless, their jaws unhinged. The air grew colder, breath steaming, the world itself darkening though dawn hovered just beyond the clouds. Then a voice echoed, not Lilith, but Emily. "No." She stood shaking, eyes defiant though ringed with red. "You used me, you tried to turn me, but I'm still me." Lilith's shadow flickered, uncertain. Emily's hands trembled, but she stepped forward. "You're still tied to me, aren't you? That's why you can't leave." Lilith hissed, her shadow seething. Michael watched, realization dawning. "She's still tethered," Michael whispered, "to Emily." Emily nodded, though her legs trembled. "If I die, you die with me." Lilith's form shivered, her voice cold and desperate. "You wouldn't." Emily looked at Michael, tears streaming. "You have to." Michael shook his head violently. "No, there has to be another way." Emily smiled faintly. "I don't think there is." Lilith surged forward, her shadow claws outstretched. "No." But Emily stepped forward, arms open. Michael acted before he could think. He drove the ritual blade through Emily's heart. Her gasp was soft, her body stiffening. Lilith shrieked, a sound that split the air, the sky, the ground. Emily's eyes, wet and wide, locked on Michael's. She whispered, "Thank you." Her body fell, lifeless, but her sacrifice burned through the tether. Lilith's shadow form convulsed, her scream endless, her body unraveling, her shape dissolving into smoke and ash, scattered on the dead wind. The ground quaked violently, the pit collapsing further, swallowing what remained. And then silence. No whisper, no tremor, only the wind, weak but real, brushing their skin. Michael dropped to his knees, sobbing, the blade clattering beside him. Owen stood numb, his mind emptied by grief. They had won, but at the price of the only person Michael had left. He sat by Emily's body, holding her hand, its warmth fading. For hours he stayed there, unmoving, until the true sun finally broke through, pale, uncertain, but real. Light touched the earth again. Owen laid a hand on Michael's shoulder. "We should go." Michael nodded weakly. They buried Emily near the hollow, under the first tree they found, the soil dark but still accepting. As they left the estate's ruins, the land felt different, lighter, emptier. But in Michael's mind, one voice remained, Emily's, her laugh, her smile. Yet sometimes, just beyond hearing when the wind was still, he thought he heard another voice, Lilith's, a whisper, a promise. "I am the night that never dies." And the world remained just a little too quiet. For now, there was a time when the Mercer family house stood bright under the morning sun, with laughter echoing through its old wooden halls. But that time had ended the day Margaret Mercer was lowered into the cold earth, her voice silenced, her warmth swallowed by death. And though the sun still rose, the house had not seen light since. The man who once called Margaret his wife had tried to move forward. His name was Richard Mercer, but he would not stay long in this story. Not after he brought another woman into the house, Clara Mercer, a stranger in the halls where his children still carried the scent of their mother's absence. The walls, once familiar, seemed colder with Clara in them, as if the house itself rejected her, like a body rejecting a bad organ. There were 3 Mercer children. Illy, the middle child, only 12, found his world shrinking after his mother's death. His grief found a home in the pages of horror comic books, filled with grotesque creatures, savage heroes, and most of all, legends. His favorite was a series about the Crimson Shade, an entity draped in blood-red cloth, a faceless killer who appeared when the right chant was spoken. Lucas, the eldest brother, kept his pain wrapped tight beneath his skin, surfacing only when he snapped at his siblings or at Clara's awkward attempts to parent. He wore his guilt like armor, heavy and rigid. And Penny, the youngest, just 9, floated like a ghost between them, her small voice often ignored, her presence a whisper behind the loud grief of her brothers. The Mercer house grew colder in the weeks after Margaret's funeral, though the weather stayed warm. It was in the walls, in the floors that creaked even when no one walked them, in the air that smelled faintly of damp soil even with windows open. One evening, Eli sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by comics. The pages of his favorite series, Tales of the Crimson Shade, curled slightly from frequent reading. At the end of the latest issue was something he hadn't noticed before, a chant, written in jagged red text, framed in dark ink. "Speak these words and he will hear. Speak them twice and he will come." It was foolishness, surely, a joke by the comics creators, but in the quiet house, where no one laughed anymore, it felt like a dare. Eli read the words aloud. His voice cracked on the first attempt, but he laughed nervously and read them again, clearer this time. The lights flickered once. The room's air grew colder. The comic pages shivered as if a draft had passed, though the window was closed. And then nothing. No burst of terror, no arrival of a monster, just silence. Eli sighed, disappointed, and returned the comic to its stack. But as he prepared for bed, he failed to notice the mirror across his room. It fogged slightly, as though someone had breathed across the glass from inside it. That night Eli dreamt. He stood in a hallway of endless doors, each door slightly ajar, darkness leaking from their seams. At the far end stood a figure in a flowing red cloak, its face hidden beneath a shadowed hood, its hands long and pale, with nails like needles. Where its eyes should have been, 2 hollow voids bled endlessly. Eli tried to speak, but his voice caught. The figure raised one hand and crooked a finger, beckoning. Then he woke breathless, his sheets damp with sweat, though the room was freezing. Downstairs, Clara made breakfast in silence. Lucas ate quickly, eyes on his plate, and Penny sat quietly, stirring her cereal until it turned to mush. Eli arrived late, pale and distracted. "Rough night?" Clara asked, trying for a smile. Eli didn't answer. He just stared at the window, watching the morning sun struggle to light the yard. The air still smelled faintly of soil. Later that day, Penny found Eli in the hallway. "I saw someone," she whispered. Eli frowned. "What?" "In my room, a tall man in red." Eli's blood ran cold. It was a dream. Penny shook her head. "He waved at me, then he was gone." Lucas overheard and scoffed. "She's just trying to scare you." But Eli's hands trembled. That night Clara had her own nightmare. She stood in the kitchen, though she didn't know how she'd gotten there. At the window stood a figure cloaked in red, its face pressed to the glass. The pain fogged with each breath. Its head tilted slowly, watching her. She awoke with a start in the kitchen, standing by the window, though she had no memory of getting out of bed. The days grew worse. Mirrors fogged without cause. Footsteps echoed from the upper floor when everyone was downstairs. Items vanished, then reappeared in strange places. A knife from the kitchen drawer lying beneath Penny's bed. A comb twisted and snapped in the bathroom sink. The family cat, Whiskers, went missing. Lucas searched the house, the yard, calling for it. On the third night, the cat returned dead, its body placed neatly at the foot of Eli's bed, its fur matted with blood, a red-stained handprint on its side. Eli screamed, bringing the family running. Clara gasped, covering Penny's eyes. "Who did this?" Clara cried. Lucas stared at Eli. "What did you do?" "I didn't," Eli sobbed, staring at the handprint. But in his mind, a whisper lingered, a voice that wasn't his. "You called me." Lucas buried the cat behind the shed, but nothing buried the dread that settled into the house. Clara tried to call for help. The phone line was dead. She tried her car. It wouldn't start. She thought of driving to town, but when she tried to walk beyond the old stone fence, she found herself back at the house, no matter which direction she walked. The house, the land, it held them tight, a clenched fist refusing to open. That night Eli confessed. He showed the comic, the chant. Clara slapped the book from his hands, horrified. "You called something here," she whispered. "You did this." Lucas punched Eli hard, sending him sprawling. "You brought this here," Lucas shouted, tears in his eyes. "You're killing us." Penny sobbed, hiding behind Clara. But Eli could only cry because he knew, he felt it, something was here, and it had heard him. In the dead of night they all heard it, a slow, dragging sound, like wet cloth pulled across the floor. Footsteps, steady and deliberate, and a voice, a low rasp like wind scraping through a grave. "Speak my name again." Eli sat upright in bed, heart pounding. A shadow stood by his door, tall, cloaked in red, its face hidden, its eyes weeping endless blood. The crimson shade had come, and it would not leave. Morning tried to arrive at the Mercer house, but the light that filtered through the old curtains was weak, as if the sun feared to touch this place. The sky remained a sickly gray, a permanent dusk that hung heavy above the roof. In the kitchen, the family gathered with eyes hollow from another night of disturbed sleep. No one mentioned the voice that had echoed through the halls, the rasp that demanded to be spoken to be named. Clara Mercer stood by the dead telephone, listening to the flat, lifeless line. She tried dialing over and over, but the only sound was a static hum, like something breathing on the other end. The car still sat in the driveway, lifeless, its engine refusing to turn, the battery dead without cause. The house was keeping them in. Penny Mercer sat quietly, her cereal untouched, her eyes heavy. She whispered under her breath, a sing-song voice that made Eli pause. "What did you say?" Eli asked. Penny looked up, dazed. "He said I should remember his name." "Whose name?" Clara asked. Penny's lip trembled. "The man in red." Clara knelt beside her, brushing her hair back. "You didn't speak his name, did you?" Penny shook her head, but her eyes weren't sure. Lucas Mercer, leaning on the kitchen counter, watched this exchange with mounting anger. "This is getting out of hand. We need to leave, on foot. I don't care if the car won't start." Clara looked at him, exhausted. "We tried. Every path brings us back here." Lucas pounded the counter with his fist, his frustration a brittle shield against his terror. Eli said nothing. His mind raced with guilt. The chant, the comic, it was his fault. But there was no time for guilt. That night the house changed. It began with the mirrors. Each reflective surface in the house, bathroom, hallway, bedrooms, fogged over at the same time. Not with condensation, but with a creeping mist that writhed like smoke trapped beneath glass. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing from the second floor. Lucas, determined to confront whatever haunted them, grabbed his old baseball bat and ascended the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The hallway was dark, the light switch unresponsive, the bulb dead or perhaps strangled by something unseen. Then he saw it in the hall's end mirror. A tall figure draped in crimson stood behind him. Lucas spun, swinging the bat, but the hallway was empty. He turned back to the mirror. The figure remained, closer now, its head tilted, the hollows where its eyes should be weeping dark trails down its cheeks. Lucas stumbled back, the bat falling from his hands. Then the mirror cracked, a jagged line spreading like a fracture in bone. From the crack, a black-red liquid seeped, thick and sluggish. Lucas ran. Downstairs he found the others, his face pale, his voice trembling. "He's here in the mirrors." Clara ordered everyone to the living room, gathering the children close, trying to hold onto the last shreds of control. But the house whispered. Every corner echoed with low voices, a choir of whispers, too quiet to understand but too numerous to ignore. Penny covered her ears, crying softly. Clara looked to Eli. "What did you read exactly? Tell me everything." Eli, his voice cracking, recited the chant from memory. The words burned into his mind. Clara shook her head. "Words have power, Eli. You opened something." "I didn't know," Eli cried. Suddenly, a scream tore through the house, not human, not fully. A sound of pain and hunger merged, a voice that promised nothing but death. The house shook, the windows vibrating, the walls creaking like old bones. The power went out, drowning the house in darkness. Clara lit candles, their flames flickering violently, as though the air itself hated light. Then came the first attack. A shadow formed near the stairs, growing taller, darker, until the crimson cloak was visible, bleeding into existence. The crimson shade stood, its face obscured, its form imposing and still. It stepped forward, and with each step, the wood beneath it rotted, the air growing colder. Lucas grabbed his bat again, charging forward with a yell. He swung, but the bat passed through the shade, who didn't flinch. A hand, pale and long-fingered, shot out and grabbed Lucas by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. Lucas gasped, his feet kicking, his face turning red. Clara grabbed the nearest object, a fireplace poker, and stabbed it into the shade's side. It passed through, yet the shade turned its head slightly toward her, acknowledging her existence. The poker froze in her hand, frost crawling up the metal and shattered like glass. Penny screamed, and the sound distracted the shade. It dropped Lucas, who collapsed, gasping. The shade turned to Penny, taking a step forward. Then a whisper. "Stop it." Eli had spoken, his voice barely above breath, yet the shade paused. Eli stared at it, trembling. yet something in his voice had power. "Go away," Eli whispered. The crimson shade tilted its head, curious. Then it spoke, the voice a blend of wind and stone. "You called me." The lights flickered back to life for a moment, and in that instant the shade vanished. But the damage was done. Lucas coughed, his neck bruised, his pride wounded. Clara knelt by him, her hands shaking. "We can't stay here." But they were trapped. The car was dead, the phone silent, the roads deceptive. Clara decided on a plan. They would seal the mirrors, every reflective surface covered, hidden. They worked through the night, draping sheets, covering glass, avoiding their own reflections. Yet in every corner of the house, shadows lingered longer than they should. Whispered names floated on the air. The crimson shade was watching. Then Clara found the comic book again, lying open on her bed despite her never bringing it there. On its pages, new words had formed in blood-red ink. "Speak me away if you dare." She burned the comic, the pages screamed. But fire did not end the terror. At midnight the clock stopped, the hands frozen. Eli awoke in his bed, hearing his name whispered. At the foot of his bed the shade stood. "Speak me again, boy." Eli shook his head, paralyzed by fear. The shade leaned closer. "Speak or bleed." But Eli's voice failed him. The shade laughed, a sound low and cold. Down the hall, Penny screamed again. Michael ran, finding her sitting in the corner, her eyes shut tight, crying. "He's inside the walls," she sobbed. "He's waiting." Morning did not come that night. Only gray light, and the cold, and the knowledge that the crimson shade was now inside their lives, inside their home, inside their minds. And it was still waiting to be named again. The Mercer house no longer belonged to the living. Whatever force held the walls together now pulsed with something older and hungrier, as though the house had shifted from wood and stone to a body made of bone and breath. Morning never came. Only a pale gray twilight loomed outside, but no matter the clock's insistence, the sky remained dull, the shadows too thick. The world had shrunk. There was only the house, the trees beyond it a barrier, like a painted backdrop concealing a void. Inside, Clara Mercer stood over the kitchen sink, her knuckles white as she gripped its edge. She hadn't slept. Her ears still echoed with the sound of the crimson shade's voice, its rasp smooth as silk, yet cold as the grave. In the living room, Lucas Mercer sat against the wall, his neck bruised from where the shade had lifted him. His bat lay by his side, but he knew now that wood and bravado would not win against a thing that did not bleed. Eli Mercer sat nearby, his eyes hollow, replaying the chant he had read from the comic, a chant that had opened the door to this horror. His fault, all of it. Penny Mercer slept fitfully, curled on the couch, murmuring in her sleep. At times she whimpered, whispering, "Don't let him in." The air was cold, breath misted in front of their lips. Then the noise returned, the wet dragging sound from above, as if something wrapped in soaked cloth was pulling itself across the wooden floors. Clara whispered, "The mirrors are covered, the windows, how is it still coming?" Lucas looked up. "Because it doesn't need them anymore." A low creak sounded from the staircase. Clara grabbed the fireplace poker, though deep down she knew it was useless. At the top of the stairs stood the crimson shade, tall and still, its crimson cloak brushing the floor. From the shadows beneath its hood, no face, only darkness and the slow drip of red from where eyes should have been. It stepped forward once, twice, the house shivering with each step. Then it vanished, the air around it collapsing with a sigh. Then the walls themselves seemed to groan, boards creaking, nails bending, as if the very house tried to move. Suddenly blood seeped from the wood grain, thin rivulets trailing down the walls, staining the paint. Clara screamed, grabbing Penny as Lucas helped Eli to his feet. Downstairs now, she cried. They ran to the basement door, wrenching it open, descending the steps into the dark. The basement was cold, the air stale and bitter. Old boxes lined the corners, covered in dust and cobwebs. A single rusted light bulb hung from the ceiling, its dim glow barely enough to cut the dark. But the basement was not empty. Against one wall, a collection of old trunks and boxes sat stacked, many marked with the name M. Mercer, Margaret, their mother. Clara knelt, pulling open a box, revealing journals, old photographs, and pages filled with strange symbols. Lucas held a yellowed photograph. Their mother, Margaret, standing in front of the house, younger, smiling, holding a book with a crimson cover. Eli flipped through one of the journals. The handwriting was their mother's, elegant, neat, but the content was maddening. The shade is older than our blood. It feeds on grief, on sorrow. It is born not by accident, but by invitation. Clara whispered she knew. More pages described their family's history, ancestors who dabbled in old rituals, speaking to the dead, trying to control what should remain buried. The crimson shade was their creation, or their curse, summoned first generations ago by a Mercer ancestor consumed by rage and grief. Since then, it lingered, waiting to be called again, feeding on families who suffered and fractured. Lucas clenched his jaw. She knew, and she didn't stop it. Eli kept reading. The final pages spoke of a ritual, a way to sever the shade's connection, but it required more than salt or iron. To banish the shade, one must confront the grief it feeds upon, surrender the sorrow, or be consumed by it. Then the walls of the basement shivered. His voice, echoed around them. Eli. Eli froze. His mother's voice, soft, sweet, just as he remembered it. Eli, darling, it's me. He turned, and in the shadows stood his mother, or something wearing her form. Her hair hung long and dark, her face pale but smiling. Her eyes shimmered, but where her pupils should have been, red tears bled. I missed you, she whispered. Eli's lips trembled. Mom. Lucas stood, eyes wide. Eli, no, it's not her. But Eli stepped forward, tears in his eyes. Margaret's form smiled wider. I can make it all better. Just say my name, Eli, invite me in. But Clara grabbed Eli, pulling him back. You're not real, she spat. The figure's smile vanished, replaced by a hollow void where the mouth should have been. Then the basement walls bled faster, the wood groaning. Lucas shouted, it's coming through the house. Then they heard it, footsteps, heavier than before, descending the basement stairs. The crimson shade stepped into the light, taller than any man, its cloak drenched, its shadow stretching too far, too wrong. It raised a hand, pointing directly at Eli. You called me. Clara stood between them, the poker shaking in her grip. What do you want? She demanded. The shade's voice was cold, final. Grief, blood, a home. Lucas grabbed the journal, reading the ritual aloud, but the shade laughed, the sound low and hateful. You cannot read your way free. It lunged, the basement lights died. Screams echoed, Penny's small cry, Lucas cursing, Clara shouting. In the dark, something cold and wet brushed against their skin. But then Eli screamed, louder than them all. Stop! Light returned, a weak bulb flickering, but the shade stood frozen, head tilted. I didn't mean to call you, Eli whispered. I didn't know what I was doing. The shade stepped closer, its voice a hiss. But you did, you wanted me. You wanted the pain to stop. Eli sobbed. I was just sad. Clara knelt, hugging him. We all are, but grief isn't an invitation. Lucas flipped deeper into the journal. There's more, he gasped. To banish the shade, we have to give it something, a confession, the thing we regret most. It feeds on grief, but if we surrender it, it starves. Eli stared at the shade. I'm sorry, I wished I died instead of Mom. I thought it would have been easier. The shade shuddered. Clara spoke next, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, I thought I could replace Margaret. I just wanted a family. Lucas whispered, I'm sorry I didn't protect Eli. Not from bullies, not from himself. I pretended not to care, but I did. The shade convulsed, its form shaking, its shadow bleeding into the floor. Then Penny, small and quiet, said, I'm sorry, I thought it was my fault Mom died. I thought if I'd been better, she'd stay. Silence. Then the shade screamed, not loud but deep, like the earth itself was crying. Its body burned, the red cloak turning to smoke, the pale hands cracking, the void where its face should be collapsing inward. It stumbled back, shrieking, trying to cling to the walls, but the confessions filled the air, each one stripping it of power. It fell to its knees, then crumbled, ash and smoke spiraling up and gone. The house sighed a long, heavy breath. The bloodstains dried, the walls stopped groaning. But no sun came, only gray, only silence. They had survived, but the house still remembered. And the shade, in some form, still watched, still waiting for someone else to speak its name again. The Mercer house lay still, but its silence was not peace. It was the quiet of breath held before a screen. The crimson shade was gone, or so they believed. Its body had crumbled, its shadow pulled back into the walls like smoke retreating into cracks. Yet the air remained wrong, like a room where the dead had spoken too recently. Though no one said it aloud, they all felt it. The shade was not finished. That night sleep offered no refuge. Clara Mercer dreamt of Margaret, her late husband's first wife, standing in the living room, her face half-rotted, eyes filled with contempt. You're nothing but a shadow of me, Margaret whispered. You wear my life like a mask. Clara tried to respond, but her mouth was sewn shut, her screams trapped behind stitched lips. Margaret reached forward, her decayed hands prying Clara's eyelids open, forcing her to stare into the void of her own reflection, where she no longer existed. When Clara awoke, her cheeks were wet, her pillow damp, but her lips, mercifully, were unsealed. Across the hall, Lucas Mercer stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror he had uncovered by accident. The glass was cracked, but his reflection stared back, except it wasn't him. The reflection smiled, mocking. You let them all suffer, it said. You played the protector, but you're a coward. You watched Eli drown in grief, you watched Penny fade. You let Mom die. Lucas smashed the mirror with his fist, shards scattering across the sink, cutting his knuckles. But even in the shattered fragments, his reflection still smiled. In his room, Eli Mercer sat in the corner, clutching a comic book. The crimson shade was gone from its pages, the story erased, replaced by blank sheets. Yet from the edges of the paper, faint whispers emerged, like breath through a crack. Say it again, the voice hissed, just once more. Eli shook his head, tears spilling, his hands shaking. Penny slept restlessly. In her dreams, she wandered the house, but the corridors stretched longer, the walls slick and poolsing like the insides of a throat. She called for her family, but the only answer was the soft patter of footsteps, her own, chasing her. Then a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in crimson, head bowed. Little girl, it crooned, you belong to me now. She tried to run, but the floor became liquid, swallowing her legs. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the dark. When morning came, or what passed for morning, Penny was gone. Clara screamed her name, searching the house, flinging open doors, but there was no sign. Lucas found a trail of blood, thin but deliberate, leading to the basement. They descended, the air colder, the walls slick with condensation. In the far corner, the old trunks and Margaret's journals remained, and there on the wall, written in blood, a message. Come to the red room. Clara's knees buckled. What does that mean? She whispered. Eli stared, remembering the words in his mother's journals. The red room, it's where the shade is strongest, where it brings the ones it takes. Lucas pulled open a trunk, rifling through Margaret's books, tossing aside brittle papers until he found one leather-bound, stained, the ink blurred. It was the ritual of severance. Margaret had written, "The shade cannot die by blade or word, only by the severing of grief, a surrender of memory given willingly, a sacrifice of what we hold dear." Clara frowned. What does that mean? Lucas read aloud. To sever the shade, each must surrender a memory, the strongest, the happiest, the thing we cherish most. It will be taken forever, but with it, the shade's grip weakens. Eli's lip quivered. We have to forget. Lucas nodded grimly. Our best memories, that's the price. They gathered what little courage they had left and prepared, but the house had begun to change. Walls shifted subtly, hallways bending where they hadn't before, doors leading to rooms that shouldn't exist. The house had become a labyrinth of grief. Clara, Lucas, and Eli moved together, navigating rooms that echoed with voices, their mother, their guilt, their pain. In one room, Clara saw herself, surrounded by children not hers, but others she might have had. They screamed for her, but their faces were blurred, forgotten dreams of motherhood unfulfilled. Lucas walked through a hall where every door opened to a memory of his mother, her laughing, her teaching him to ride a bike, her reading to him. And with every door he opened, the memories faded, dulled, like ink running in rain. Eli found himself in a nursery, empty, except for a single rocking chair moving slowly, though no one sat in it. A lullaby played faintly, his mother's voice, singing him to sleep. Then in the center of the house, they found the red room. It was no longer part of the house. It was a cavern of walls that bled, floorboards like flesh, the air thick with rot and sorrow. At the center stood Penny, suspended in the air, her body limp, her mouth slightly open, her eyes rolled back. Beneath her, the crimson shade waited, taller, clearer, its form more solid, its cloak a deeper red, its face still obscured. It spoke. Give me your grief, or she remains mine. Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking. I surrender my memory of love. The moment I first felt it for Richard, take it. The shade shivered, its shadow flickering. Lucas, his voice hollow, said, I give up the day Mom called me her brave boy, the last time I felt proud. And Eli whispered, I surrender the last hug my mom gave me, the last time I felt her warmth. The room shook, the walls quivering. The shade screamed, a sound not just of pain, but of hunger denied. Its form cracked, black veins running through its body, its shadow peeling away like bark from a dead tree. Lucas rushed forward, catching Penny as she fell, her eyes fluttering open. Clara screamed as the shade lunged one last time, but Eli stepped forward, holding the ritual knife found in the journals. He stabbed it into the shade's chest, where a heart might have been. The shade shrieked, its form unraveling, light bursting from the wound, smoke and ash swirling. And then silence. The room stood still. The walls stopped bleeding. The house groaned, not in pain, but in relief. They carried Penny out, her small voice whispering, I saw Mommy. No one answered. The red room collapsed behind them, vanishing as though it had never been. Outside, the sky remained gray, but dawn finally broke. Yet as they stood in the house's quiet ruin, each of them felt the absence. The memories surrendered were truly gone. Faces they loved, moments of warmth blurred, unreachable. The shade was gone. But grief remained. And somewhere deep within the earth, where the house's shadow once stood, the crimson shade still whispered, waiting for the day another voice would call it by name. The house stood hollow, but the emptiness was deceptive. Though the crimson shade had been torn and the red room collapsed, the house itself remained alive, watching, breathing. The air hung stagnant, no matter how many windows were opened. The walls refused to warm, as if grief itself had soaked into the wood. For a day, the Mercer family tried to breathe again. Penny rested, her face pale, her voice weak, but she was alive. Clara, Lucas, and Eli sat in the kitchen, the weight of what they had surrendered gnawing in their silence. The memories they gave up gone. Try as they might, the images would not return. They could remember the faces of the dead, but not the moments that made them real. But deep beneath, something still stirred. That night, the house began to shift again. It started with the smell, copper and soil, as though they stood above an open grave. Then the sounds, the walls whispered, not voices but breath-long exhales, as though the house exhaled with them trapped inside. The floorboards pulsed underfoot, like the weak beat of a dying heart. Then came the knocks, soft, rhythmic, like knuckles against hollow wood. Clara stood in the hallway, frozen. The knock repeated, louder, faster, coming from beneath the floor. Lucas grabbed his bat, though he knew its futility. "What is that?" Eli answered, his voice hollow. "It's her, she's not gone." Then the floor cracked. Boards splintered in the living room, a wound in the house tearing open. From beneath, the darkness bloomed, and from it, a hand emerged, long, pale, with fingers like sharpened bone. The crimson shade pulled itself from the earth, rising tall and terrible, its cloak darker than before, wet with soil and something worse. Its face remained hidden, but now its eyes burned from within the hood, twin lights like dying stars. "You thought memory was enough," it whispered, voice echoing in their bones. "But memory is not grief. Grief does not fade." The shade raised its hand, and the house obeyed. The walls trembled, boards splitting, windows cracking. Rooms twisted, corridors lengthened. The house was no longer a structure. It was a living maze, designed to divide and consume. The family scattered. Clara grabbed Penny, running down the hall, but the path stretched, the hallway growing longer with each step. Lucas tried to follow, but was pulled into a side room, the door slamming shut behind him. Eli stood alone in the living room, the shade watching. "Why," Eli cried, "we gave you everything." The shade's voice was cold. "Not everything. You still remember the pain, and that is enough." The walls bent, a door opening where none had been. Eli stepped through, determined to find the others, but the house whispered lies. From every direction he heard his mother's voice, calling him, crying for help. He clenched his fists, trying to focus, but grief gnawed at his mind. Elsewhere, Clara pushed forward, Penny clutched to her chest. They ran through the stretching hall, doors multiplying on every side, each one slightly open, revealing shadows that moved within. "Don't open them," Clara whispered, but the doors whispered back, "Let us in." In one room, Clara glimpsed a vision. Herself, sitting with Richard, happy, married, children running around, a life untouched by death. She faltered, the memory almost real, almost hers. But Penny's soft voice pulled her back. "Don't stop, Mommy." She kept moving. Lucas fought his way through a room where the walls bled. The floor was slick, bodies pressed beneath the boards, their faces screaming silently in the wood. Hands reached up, grasping his legs, cold and strong. He swung his bat, smashing arms, breaking bone, screaming in rage and fear. At the heart of the house, they all converged, drawn by the sound of the shade's voice. They arrived in a space that hadn't existed before, a cathedral of rot, high ceilings formed by beams of bone, the air heavy with the smell of old blood. In the center stood the crimson shade, its cloak billowing without wind. "You cannot destroy me," it hissed. I am every sorrow you've ever known, every ache you hide. I am the shadow you cast. But Eli stepped forward, shaking, his hands empty. You're not real, you're just what we made. The shade's head tilted. Clara spoke next, her voice trembling but firm. We gave you life when we let grief grow. We fed you. Lucas raised his bat. We're done feeding. The shade shrieked, not in pain but in rage. It lunged forward, a blur of red and black. But Eli screamed, not in fear but in defiance. I sever you. The house shook. The words were old, not from the journal but from deep in Eli's bones, instinctual, ancestral. Lucas swung his bat, striking the shade, but this time it struck true. The bat cracked against the figure, its form shivering, its shape unstable. Clara stepped forward, her hands bloodied from broken nails and splinters. I sever you, she cried. The shade screamed, its form splitting, smoke pouring from its cloak, bones visible beneath for the first time. Penny, barely standing, whispered, I sever you. And the house began to collapse. The walls split, the ceiling falling, the ground shaking. The shade howled, its form pulled apart, its cloak burning into ash. In its final breath it spoke. Grief always returns. You will call me again. Then it was gone, its body a pile of ash. Its shadow burned into the floor. The house shook, then grew still. They stood in the ruin of what was once their home, the air lighter, the sky beyond the windows clearing to the faint blue of a true morning. They had won, but not without cost. The memories they gave remained gone. The grief was quieter, but the scars stayed. Outside, birds sang faintly, life returning. Yet Eli, standing in the doorway, knew the truth. The crimson shade was not dead, not fully. It slept deep beneath the earth, beneath memory, beneath sorrow, waiting for the next voice, the next grief deep enough to awaken it. And when that day came, it would rise again, cloaked in red, with eyes that bled the past. The house no longer stood as it was. It was a ruin, barely upright, its walls cracked, its bones exposed like an old body too stubborn to collapse entirely. Sunlight, weak, hesitant, poured through shattered windows, catching on the dust that drifted like ash in the air. And yet the Mercer family was alive. Clara Mercer stood in the threshold of what was once the living room, her body bruised, her hands bloodied, but her eyes open. The air was lighter. The shadows no longer reached for her. Yet inside, she was emptier than she could have imagined. Behind her, Lucas Mercer sat on the steps that led nowhere now. The staircase had collapsed halfway, broken like a snapped spine. His bat lay across his lap, its surface splintered from the battle with the crimson shade, but still intact, like him, scarred but standing. Eli Mercer sat in the dirt outside, knees drawn to his chest, staring at nothing. His eyes were open but glazed, not with shock but with loss. He had given more than memory. He had given part of himself. And Penny Mercer sat in Clara's arms, quiet, pale, her breath shallow but steady. For a while no one spoke. The silence was not comforting. It was the quiet after a scream. The crimson shade was gone. The red room had collapsed. Its voice no longer echoed through the walls. The air, though heavy with dust, was breathable again. But grief had not left them. It merely changed shape. Clara was the first to move. She stepped into the kitchen, a place that once held the mundane rituals of family. Breakfasts, arguments, laughter, the smell of coffee. Now the room was gutted, the cabinets splintered, the table broken in half. She searched anyway out of habit. A glass survived, chipped but whole. She filled it with water from the tap. The water ran clear. A small, absurd mercy. She brought it to Penny, who drank weakly, her lips barely wetting. Lucas finally spoke. What do we do now? His voice was hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken for years. Clara sat beside him, exhausted. We leave. Lucas looked around, gesturing at the broken walls, the sky bleeding light through holes in the roof. This was all we had. Clara shook her head slowly. This house isn't ours anymore. Maybe it never was. Outside, Eli remained still. He stared at the sky where clouds shifted, unsure whether to clear or stay. The sun was rising, yet it barely burned. Then he whispered to himself, "She's still here." Lucas heard, "No, she's gone. We killed her." Eli shook his head. "We didn't kill her. She went back to sleep." Penny stirred, her voice soft as a sigh. "She said she'll wait." They all fell silent. Then, as if prompted, a sound arose, distant, faint. The sound of a bell, not from the house but further from the town perhaps, a church bell marking morning. The world had not ended. Clara helped Penny stand, and together with Lucas, they gathered what little they could. A backpack, a blanket, a photograph frame that miraculously remained unbroken, though the picture inside was burned, the faces blurred. As they stepped outside, leaving the house behind, the ground seemed to sigh. The soil around the house was darker, as if stained by something that would never wash away. They crossed the old fence, the one that had once trapped them. Now it let them pass. The road appeared again, winding and cracked but real. Trees stood still, no longer hiding or watching. They walked. Step after step, the house shrank behind them until it vanished beyond the tree line. But the weight inside them did not leave. Each of them had sacrificed a memory. For Clara, it was the moment she first loved. For Lucas, the pride his mother once gave him. For Eli, the last hug from his mother. And for Penny, a mother's face. They remembered having loved, having laughed, but the details were gone, smudged like charcoal in rain. As they reached the town's edge, a man in overalls waved at them from his porch. "Thought that house was empty," he said. Clara didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain. "Storm come through?" the man asked. Lucas shook his head. "Something like that." They passed by silent. The world was normal here, cars, birdsong, the smell of grass. The horror was behind them. Or so it seemed. That night, as they settled in a motel room provided by a kind stranger, Eli couldn't sleep. He stared at the blank television screen, his reflection faint. And then, just for a moment, the screen flickered, a pulse of static. A shape appeared, crimson, cloaked, faceless. Eli blinked. The screen returned to black. But the whisper remained. "Where grief lives, I wait." He looked at his family, Clara asleep in a chair, Lucas staring out the window, Penny curled up in bed. Eli smiled faintly. "You'll wait a long time." Outside, the sun finally rose, a pale but real dawn. And though the crimson shade was gone, its shadow remained, not in the house, not in the ground, but in them. Because grief doesn't die. It waits. The wind that circled the Blackwell house that night carried the scent of something old, something that did not belong to the living. Though the coven gathered beneath the shroud of midnight, the air betrayed their ritual. No matter how tightly the circle was drawn, the ground itself seemed unwilling to hold the lines of salt. 4 witches stood around the candlelit circle, Fiona Blackwell the leader, her voice sharp and commanding. Ivy Marlowe, her mind steeped in occult knowledge. Tessa Grimsby, wild and reckless, her ambition often outrunning her caution. And Serena Crow, prideful, sharp-eyed and growing, resentful of the hierarchy that always placed her second to Fiona. Tonight was meant to be a power-sharing ritual, an old spell to rebalance the strengths of the coven, or so Fiona claimed. But beneath the surface, old grudges simmered, and distrust ran like a current beneath their feet. Serena stood opposite Fiona, her gaze unwavering, her lips curling faintly with disdain. "You're holding back," Serena accused, her voice slicing through the cold air. "You don't want us equals." Fiona didn't falter. "You speak because you're afraid you'll never surpass me." The candles flickered. The wind pressed against the house, groaning like wood beneath strain. Tessa laughed low, enjoying the spark of conflict, while Ivy's eyes darted between them, her instincts screaming that this was wrong. Rituals laced with resentment invited things they could not banish. They should have stopped, but pride, that ancient rot, would not allow it. Fiona pressed forward with the incantation, her voice rising, pulling the others back into rhythm. But Serena's heart pounded with a different rhythm, one of defiance. She chanted with venom, her intent warping the spell with each word. The circle began to break. The air snapped, the lines of salt scattered as if by unseen hands. The candles extinguished all at once, plunging them into darkness. Then came the scream, not from outside, but from within the circle. A sound sharp, ragged, and ending too abruptly. When light returned, conjured by Ivy in a panic, Serena lay on the floor, her eyes wide, mouth agape, her body twisted unnaturally. Dead. The other three stood frozen. Ivy knelt to check, but no breath passed Serena's lips. Her skin grew pale, blood draining from her face as though the earth itself pulled it from her veins. Tessa was the first to speak. This wasn't the spell. But Fiona's face was blank, her mind already calculating, already seeking answers that wouldn't come. "We tell no one," Fiona said coldly. "We bury her. This never happened." Ivy protested, her voice trembling. "She was our sister." "She was our rival," Fiona snapped. "Now she's dead, but if word gets out, they'll burn us." Tessa nodded reluctantly. Fear, that loyal motivator, sealed their fate. That night they buried Serena behind the Blackwell house, beneath the roots of an ancient oak where the soil was always damp, always cold. They whispered no prayers. There was no final word, only dirt and silence. But the dirt never truly settled. Days passed, the air heavier than before. The coven did not meet again. Each woman carried the weight differently, Fiona with sharp control, Ivy with guilt gnawing at her, and Tessa with the wild tremble of someone expecting a knock at the door of their mind. But the house was not quiet. At night the wind brought whispers through the broken boards. A voice, soft, insistent, that sounded like Serena. "You left me here." Fiona drank deeper each night, her spell books left untouched. Ivy dreamed of the grave, of fingers reaching through the soil, scratching at the underside of the earth. Tessa started hearing her name spoken from nowhere. Then came the visitor, Leela Winters, a witch unaffiliated, quiet, drawn to the disturbances in the magic that coiled through the town like an invisible mist. Leela approached Fiona directly, her dark eyes wary. "There's imbalance here," Leela said. "A wound in the veil." Fiona lied easily. "You're imagining ghosts." But Leela was not convinced. She stayed near, watching the Blackwell house from the woods, watching the walls shiver in the night. It was Ivy who broke first. Consumed by guilt, she approached Fiona and Tessa with a discovery, an old Ouija board stored in the depths of Evelyn Darkmoor's forbidden library. Evelyn, a recluse witch elder, had warned Ivy of it, said it was a bridge, a door, and a curse all in one. "We can bring her back," Ivy whispered. "Fix the imbalance, maybe even save ourselves." Fiona was skeptical. Tessa was eager. "We're already damned," Tessa grinned. "Might as well finish the ritual." Fiona agreed, though her heart warned otherwise. Power unbalanced always sought a price, but fear of Serena's lingering ghost was worse than her return. They gathered in the attic of the Blackwell house, the Ouija board at the center, candles trembling in their holders. They placed their fingers on the planchette. The air was already cold, as though something had arrived ahead of their summons. Ivy whispered the chant, the board responding, the planchette sliding with unnatural speed. Letters formed, IMCOMING. Tessa laughed, nerves on edge. She remembers us. Then the planchette stopped. The candles went out. Footsteps wet, slow, from the attic's dark corners. Then her voice. "Hello, sisters." A figure stepped into the candlelight, flickering back to life without flame. It was Serena, but not wholly. Her eyes shimmered, glassy and dark. Her skin too pale, her smile stretched too wide. She stood taller somehow, her presence deeper, heavier, as if she carried a shadow within her. They stood frozen. Serena looked at each of them. "Did you miss me?" Fiona's voice cracked. "We wanted to bring you back." Serena chuckled. "No, you wanted to bury me." Her gaze pierced through them, and the air grew colder. "But I came back anyway." Tessa stepped forward. "You're alive, that's what matters." But Serena's eyes caught Tessa, and in that moment the candlelight flickered red. "I'm not alive," Serena whispered. "Not really." The house shivered. The Ouija board trembled. And outside, beneath the old oak, the ground stirred as if something else was waking. By morning, the town's stray animals lay dead, their bodies twisted, drained, their eyes black as if burned from the inside. And in the woods, Leela Winters stood watching the Blackwell house, sensing the storm to come. The circle was broken. Serena Crow had returned. And she was hungry. Morning did not greet the Blackwell house, not properly. Though the sun hung in the sky, its light could not break the heaviness that settled after Serena Crow's return. The air was thick. The walls seemed closer, as though the house itself strained to hold its form. Serena walked the halls like she had never left. Yet she moved differently now, gliding instead of stepping, her presence soaking into the wood like blood into cloth. Her smile, always sharp, was now too still, like a painting whose eyes followed from every angle. Fiona Blackwell, Ivy Marlowe, and Tessa Grimsby watched her in silence, each hiding the storm in their own chest. They had brought her back, yet none of them could claim to understand what had returned. Serena spoke little, but when she did, her words held a weight that made the air colder. That first morning, Serena stood by the window, staring into the woods. "You buried me like an animal," she whispered. "But the dirt," whispered back. Tessa laughed nervously. "What did it say?" Serena smiled faintly. "It said I didn't belong there." That night the deaths began. Small animals first. Birds plummeting from the sky, their wings stiff before they hit the ground. Stray cats found gutted, their bodies arranged in circles outside the house, their blood drawn in symbols no living witch would dare use. Ivy was the first to suspect the truth. In the attic, by candlelight, she studied Evelyn Darkmoor's grimoires. She traced the marks she'd seen outside. They belonged not to resurrection, but to death rituals, magic that drew strength from the siphoning of life. Serena was not just alive, she was feeding. Fiona, faced with the undeniable signs, confronted Serena. "What have you become?" Serena's head tilted. Her eyes glimmered, black and wet. "What you made me." She extended her hand, her fingers long, pale, cold as marble. "Touch me, Fiona, see what I am." Fiona hesitated but stepped forward. As her skin met Serena's palm, a rush of images assaulted her, soil, rot, endless dark beneath the world, and beneath it all a voice, a presence that had followed Serena back. Fiona pulled away, gasping. "You brought something with you." Serena nodded, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Something came when I called. It lives inside now." The others watched, terrified. Tessa, however, was mesmerized. The power Serena radiated was undeniable, dark, commanding. "You could teach me," Tessa whispered. "You don't have to be alone." Serena's smile widened. Outside the Blackwell house, Leela Winters circled the perimeter. She traced the air with her fingers, feeling the vibrations of something that shouldn't exist. She knew a door had been opened, but she did not yet know how to close it. Inside, Serena's darkness grew bolder. She visited Ivy in the night, standing at her bedside, whispering dreams into her ear. Visions of death, of rivers of blood flowing beneath a sky without stars. Ivy woke screaming, a thin line of blood trickling from her nose, though Serena had never laid a hand on her. Fiona gathered Ivy and Tessa the next day. "We need to stop her," Fiona said. "She isn't Serena anymore." But Tessa shook her head, eyes alight with greed. "She's power. She's everything we're too weak to be." Fiona stared in disbelief. "She'll kill us." Tessa smiled. "Then we should be on her side." The coven fractured that night. Tessa knelt before Serena, pledging herself. Serena accepted with a kiss on the forehead, a kiss that burned cold, marking Tessa's skin with a black sigil. And with that, Tessa's soul began to rot from within. Ivy, torn between loyalty and terror, begged Fiona for guidance. "We need help," Ivy whispered. That help came in the form of Leela, who entered the house uninvited, her presence unsettling Serena, though the returned witch masked it with a smile. "You've done something unforgivable," Leela said. "You've brought back what should stay dead." Serena chuckled. "You're welcome to try and put me down." Leela revealed a fragment of her own magic, a spell that shimmered with Severance energy, power designed not to kill, but to banish. Serena recoiled slightly, the first time her confidence cracked. But Tessa stood by her side, growling, her eyes hollow, her skin grayish pale, already changing, her humanity dissolving. The night stretched longer. Serena's powers grew with every death in the town. A man found hanging in his barn, drained of blood. Another woman discovered in her car, eyes sunken, mouth sewn shut by invisible thread. Fiona and Ivy, guided by Leela, prepared for war. But war with the dead was never fair. For Serena had not returned alone. She carried the whispers of the veil, the land between life and death. And in her wake, shadows moved, formless, hungry, waiting to be given bodies. The Blackwell house stood heavy with dread, and in the attic, the Ouija board remained, its planchette moving sometimes on its own, spelling one word again and again. M-O-R-E. Serena stood watching the board, her eyes wet with darkness. And she smiled, because more was coming. The town sat under an unnatural sky, gray, heavy, always on the verge of dusk, though the clocks insisted it was morning. The Blackwell house stood like a wounded beast, its windows dark, its walls seeming to breathe when no one looked too closely. And inside the dead ruled. Serena Crow, once a sister of the coven, now its usurper, sat in the attic surrounded by symbols drawn in blood and ash. The Ouija board, stained and pulsing faintly, waited in the center, its planchette shifting even without touch, as though the board itself whispered in a language too old for mortal tongues. Beside Serena stood Tessa Grimsby, or rather, what remained of her. Her skin grayed, veins black as ink, her eyes hollow save for faint, flickering red where pupils should have been. Her body remained upright, her mind half her own, half shadow. Tessa was dead and living, servant and slave. Serena watched her with affection, the affection of a sculptor, admiring a half-finished piece of grotesque art. "You'll be complete soon," Serena whispered, "when the blood moon rises." Outside, the sky trembled. The moon would soon fill, and when it did, it would shine red. A rare event, a blood moon when the veil between life and death thinned. On that night, Serena would complete her transformation from witch to something beyond life. And then there would be no stopping her. But not all witches bowed. Fiona Blackwell, burdened with guilt and fire, gathered with Ivy Marlowe and Leela Winters in the remains of Evelyn Darkmoor's old library, the mentor witch who had warned them, now dead by Serena's hands. They scoured grimoires, pages of brittle parchment and ink long faded, searching for a way to sever Serena's bond with death. Ivy's hands trembled as she turned each page. Her strength waned. Serena's power had marked her, weakening her with dreams of rot and grave soil. She knew her magic would not last much longer. Leela the Outsider Witch found it first, a ritual older than their coven, called the Blood Moon Pact. Fiona read aloud. Under blood sky, when night and day blur, sever the dead's grip by binding soul to soul. One must sacrifice their gift, another their bloodline, a third their life if fate demands. Ivy swallowed hard. One of us dies. Leela's eyes darkened, and one must surrender magic forever. Silence hung heavy. No one spoke of who would pay which price. Meanwhile in the Blackwell house, Serena prepared. She raised her hands, chanting, her voice deep and layered, not alone, but as though dozens spoke through her throat. Shadows gathered around her, coalescing into forms, formless spirits pulled from the veil, craving flesh. Serena promised them bodies, but she needed more power, she needed life. She turned to Tessa, her first creation. "Bring me Ivy." Tessa, loyal and broken, obeyed. She stalked the woods, senses tuned to the pulse of Ivy's fatting magic. In the woods, Fiona, Ivy, and Leela prepared the first stages of the Blood Moon Pact, carving symbols into the earth, lighting black candles that burned blue. The air grew colder. Then the trees groaned, branches cracking not from wind, but from something moving between them. Tessa attacked. She crashed through the brush, inhumanly fast, her body no longer bound by mortal frailty. She lunged at Ivy, claws forming where nails had been, her mouth splitting wider than human jaws allowed. Fiona blocked her, casting a ward that briefly knocked Tessa back. But Tessa rose, bones cracking unbothered. Leela stepped forward, chanting a spell of binding, her voice steady. Vines burst from the earth, ensnaring Tessa, holding her tight, but the vines withered almost instantly where they touched her flesh. Tessa grinned, her teeth too sharp. But then Ivy, weak but desperate, cast a blast of pure light, the last of her strength. The light seared Tessa's grayed skin, burning the rot within. She screamed, the sound a twisted wail that echoed beyond the trees. Her body collapsed, ash and bone. Ivy fell to her knees, gasping, her power spent, her veins darkening. "I'm done," Ivy whispered. "I've got nothing left." Fiona caught her, holding her upright. "Then we finish this before any of us are gone." Night approached. The blood moon began its ascent, casting red light that made the world bleed. Serena felt it in her bones. She stood beneath the sky, arms wide. "The veil thins," she whispered. "Soon I will never die." Back in the woods, Fiona, Ivy, and Leela completed the Blood Moon Pact circle, the ground etched with blood and salt. Leela read the final lines. "To sever the unholy, one of us must bleed. One must surrender, and one must end her." Ivy touched Fiona's arm. "I can't fight. I'll give up my magic. It's all I have left to give." Fiona nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'll fight her," Fiona said. Leela's voice was soft. "And me." Fiona looked at her. "You're the bloodline sacrifice." Leela frowned. "Why?" Fiona whispered, "Because Serena's soul is tied to yours." Leela's eyes widened. She remembered the dream visions of a shared ancestor, a witch burned long ago, the curse that marked their family. If Leela died, Serena's bond would sever. And Leela accepted. "I'll do it." They marched to the Blackwell house, now a cathedral of rot, the walls bleeding, windows dark. Serena waited, smiling, her form radiant and monstrous. "So you came to die," she said. Fiona stepped forward, her power flaring. Serena raised her hands, shadows forming into beasts, wraiths shrieking, charging. Fiona fought them, her magic burning hot, but the shadows overwhelmed. Ivy, despite her weakness, cast wards, holding back the tide. Leela stepped through, blood staining her hands, a dagger held firm. Serena saw her. "You're mine, little cousin," Serena hissed. "You can't kill blood." Leela whispered, "But I can give it." She drove the dagger into her own chest, a sacrifice by bloodline. Serena screamed, her body cracking, her power faltering. Fiona struck then, blasting Serena with every spell she had left. Serena's body crumbled, her cloak burning, her voice shattering into 1,000 cries. The house collapsed around them. Leela lay dying, Fiona holding her. "I had to," Leela whispered. "Only way." Ivy, drained but alive, wept silently. The blood moon passed. The dead were gone. But the cost remained. The moon hung bloated and red, casting a bloody veil over the world. In its sickly glow, the Blackwell house transformed from a crumbling relic into a cathedral of rot and bone. Walls that once held laughter now wept blood, their wooden planks pulsing like veins. The air was heavy, damp with the scent of old graves and something worse, the stench of death waiting to rise. Inside, Serena Crow stood at the altar of her making, the old attic, now swallowed by shadow and decay. Around her, the floor was etched with sigils that pulsed faintly, drawn in blood too dark to be recent. The Ouija board, warped and alive, sat at the center, its planchette twitching like a living thing, spelling words in a language no living tongue could replicate. Her voice was no longer her own, layered, distorted, the sound of many dead speaking as one. She called to the veil, beckoning the lost, the angry, the hungry. And the house answered. Walls whispered, mirrors breathed, footsteps echoed on floors long abandoned. Ghosts, incomplete and furious, gathered in corners, their forms only half visible, faces blurred, mouths agape but soundless. She was building her coven of the dead. Beyond the threshold, in the suffocating woods, Fiona Blackwell, Ivy Marlowe, and the fatting presence of Leela Winters prepared their descent. Leela's wound, self-inflicted in the blood pact, had left her weakened, her skin pale as wax, her breath shallow. But her connection to Serena, by blood, by curse, remained their guide. Ivy, her magic nearly depleted, pressed forward out of duty, guilt, and fear. She carried the remnants of Evelyn Darkmoor's grimoire, its pages flacking like dead skin. Fiona led, her eyes burning with exhaustion disguised as resolve. She knew the house awaited them. She also knew they might never leave. They crossed the threshold. The house swallowed them whole. The door closed behind them, with a sound like a breath held too long. Inside, the house was wrong. The corridors stretched impossibly, doors where there had never been doors, staircases spiraling into darkness where walls once stood. Paint peeled in slow, deliberate curls, as if the walls shed their skin. The air was alive. Every step forward was like walking through something breathing, warm and damp. The first spirit appeared in the hall, a woman, her eyes sewn shut, her mouth gaping. She hovered inches above the floor, her arms broken at wrong angles. She whispered without sound. Ivy raised a ward, but the spirit passed through, leaving behind a chill that turned breath to frost. Then came the others, children missing half their faces, a man with no skin, a bride in a rotted dress dragging her own severed feet. The house had become a mausoleum of the unwanted dead. Fiona pressed on, leading them to the heart, the attic. But the house resisted. Doors led to the same room. Staircases shifted, floors sagged as if beneath invisible weight. Ivy collapsed at one point, her strength gone, her veins dark, her pulse slowing. "I'm done," she whispered. But the house was not merciful. The walls bled, and from them, Tessa Grimsby emerged, no longer even partially human. Her body was gray, stretched thin, her eyes black pits, her mouth a jagged rip across her face. Tessa smiled, her voice hollow. "Come to join us." She lunged. Fiona fought, her magic weak but fueled by fury. Leela stood barely conscious, yet her blood, cursed and bound to Serena, shimmered faintly, repelling Tessa's full force. Ivy, with the last of her magic, summoned a light that seared Tessa's grayed flesh, forcing her back. Fiona struck, impaling Tessa through the chest with a splintered beam. Tessa gasped, grinned, then crumbled to ash, whispering, "She's waiting." They pushed onward until at last the attic door appeared. Beyond it, the beating heart of the house. The attic was vast, far larger than physics allowed, a chamber of bones and shadows. The rafters dripped with viscera, the beams strung with hanging corpses, past victims, past witches. At the center stood Serena. But she was no longer Serena. Her form was taller, her face an abyss, her limbs elongated, her cloak of crimson fused to her body like living skin. Her eyes burned not red, but void, endless. She smiled. "Welcome home." The Ouija board floated before her, spinning, glowing faintly. Leela stepped forward, her voice weak. "It ends tonight." Serena chuckled, her voice a chorus of the dead. "It ended when you opened the board." Fiona attacked, her spells flaring, but Serena absorbed them, her form rippling, her voice mocking. Ivy tried to cast, but collapsed, her body spent. Serena approached, her shadow stretching, teeth glimmering. But Leela spoke the severance rite, her blood glowing, veins alight. Serena screamed, a sound that cracked the air. Fiona, using her last spell, split the Ouija board, shattering it. Serena's form shuddered, light bursting from her core. The house groaned, walls cracking, beams collapsing. Serena's last words echoed. "You cannot banish grief, I will always wait." Her body exploded in ash, her shadow consumed in light. The house burned. Fiona dragged Ivy and Leela down the collapsing stairs, the walls screaming, the air thick with smoke, and the cries of ghosts fading into oblivion. They escaped as the house collapsed inward, swallowed by the earth itself. And when the dust settled, only soil remained, dark, wet, and still. They had won, but the shadow remained in them. And beneath the soil, something still whispered, waiting for another voice to call it by name. The Blackwell house was gone, devoured by the earth itself. But the land remained wrong, the ground too soft, the air still heavy, as though something vast and rotting lay just beneath the soil, dreaming in shallow sleep. For Fiona Blackwell, Ivy Marlowe, and the barely living Leela Winters, escape was not salvation. They had survived the collapse, but survival was a deceit. The shadow of Serena Crow still clung to their bones, whispering at the edge of their thoughts. At night, when eyes closed, Serena's voice remained. "You can't sever me. I am your grief. I am your guilt." The blood moon had passed, but the curse was not undone. They regrouped in the ruins of Evelyn Darkmoor's library, the air there colder, the walls stained with age and sorrow. The final section of Evelyn's grimoire remained, the true severance ritual, a spell that was incomplete, missing pieces inked in red but blurred by Evelyn's violent end. Leela, her body failing, whispered as she read, "It says, one must surrender their magic, one must spill their bloodline, one must offer their soul." They knew then that their choices had not been enough. Serena's root in the world remained alive because the final sacrifice had not yet been made. Fiona stood, eyes burning. "I'll offer my soul." Ivy shook her head weakly, her body wasting. I have nothing left, take me. But Leela stared beyond them, her voice distant. It was always meant to be me. Because Leela was of Serena's blood, a cursed thread running back generations. Only her death, offered willingly and completely, could tear the root from the world. They prepared. At midnight, they returned to the hollow ground where the house once stood. The soil steamed faintly under the cold night, as though it still breathed. They traced the severance circle, symbols drawn in salt and bone dust, candles placed at precise intervals, each flame guttering against an unseen wind. The air grew colder. Then the earth cracked. Serena rose, not fully formed, a wraith of shadow and blood, her face a mask of all who had died for her resurrection. Her voice was the wind through graves. Still trying to unmake me. Fiona raised her magic, fire burning along her hands, but Serena waved, and Fiona was flung aside, her breath stolen. Ivy attempted a ward, but Serena whispered a single word, and Ivy's veins burned, her body crumpling, too weak to continue. Leela stood within the circle, her blood already offered, wrists cut, dripping into the soil. Serena stepped forward, her form growing clearer, almost human, almost alive. You don't want to die, Serena crooned. You can join me. Leela shook her head. Not this time. She chanted the final words, the circle glowing white-hot, salt burning into flame. Serena screamed, a sound like the sky itself tearing. Leela's body glowed, her blood boiling, her skin splitting. Then came the betrayal. Ivy, in her weakness, crawled forward whispering Serena's name, begging for forgiveness for life. Serena reached for her, but Leela's voice rang out. I sever you, by blood, by bone, by sacrifice. Light erupted from the circle. Serena's form burned, crumbling, her voice dissolving into static. Ivy's body withered, her last breath stolen as the light consumed them both. Fiona watched helpless, as both Serena and Ivy vanished, ash in the cold wind. When the light faded, Leela was gone. Only Fiona remained, kneeling in the ruin, the soil still steaming. The severance was complete. But Fiona wept, not just for the dead, but for the knowledge that Serena's voice still whispered. Because grief, once summoned, is never truly severed. And beneath the soil, something still waited, where no ritual could reach. Dawn rose over the hollowed ruins where the Blackwell house once stood, but the sun was pale, weak, as if afraid to fully rise over cursed ground. The sky remained bruised, heavy with clouds that held no rain, only an oppressive stillness. The earth where the severance ritual had burned was dark and cracked, the soil forever spoiled. The circle of salt and blood remained faintly etched in the dirt, a scar that no wind or weather could erase. Only one stood in the quiet, Fiona Blackwell. She was alone now. Leela Winters was gone, her life surrendered in the ritual, her blood the key to severing Serena Crow's unholy tether. Ivy Marlowe, consumed by weakness and betrayal, had perished in the severance circle, her final breath claimed by the light meant to destroy the dead. Fiona sat in the dirt, her hands stained with blood not her own, her body exhausted, her magic barely a flicker in her veins. She had survived, but the word felt hollow. For though Serena was gone, her body dust, her shadow burned away, something of her remained in the air, in the soil, in the mind. Fiona could still hear her, faintly, like a memory that refused to fade. I'm still here, Fiona. The land was quiet, but never silent. Fiona returned to what was left of Evelyn Darkmoor's estate, now abandoned and rotting. She buried what little remained of Ivy, a ring, a lock of hair, tokens of a life misspent in fear and pride. She marked no gravestone. There were no words suitable for a witch who had betrayed everything, yet had died too weak to change her fate. At night, Fiona lit candles in the empty halls, the flames flickering with every whisper of wind that should not have reached indoors. She kept the last grimoire close, the severance completed, yet the last spell unwritten. For Evelyn's final warning remained. You cannot kill what is born of grief. You can only bind it, for a time. Fiona knew then that Serena's destruction was not total. She had been scattered, yes, but not erased. Grief does not die. It waits. Weeks passed, the town resumed its shallow routines, unaware of the war that had been waged beneath their feet. But sometimes, children whispered of hearing a woman's voice by the ruins, singing lullabies no one taught them. Sometimes, stray animals refused to cross the grounds. Sometimes, mirrors fogged without reason. Fiona watched these signs knowing. One night beneath a new moon, she prepared the last spell, a binding she would cast alone. By candlelight, she drew symbols in ash and bone. She mixed her own blood with ink, drawing sigils across her arms, her chest, her neck. She spoke Serena's name. The air grew cold instantly. The shadows deepened, and in them, Serena's form flickered. Not whole, not alive, but present. Why, Serena's voice asked, softer than before. Why call me again? Fiona stood, her voice shaking but firm. To finish it. Serena's form smiled, her face a ghost's memory. You can't finish grief, you can only carry it. Fiona raised her hands, casting the spell. Light flared, the air screamed. Serena's shadow convulsed, her form collapsing inward. The house shook, windows cracked, the candles flared. Then silence. The shadow was gone. The spell was done. But as Fiona stood in the dying light, her body numb, she knew the truth. Serena wasn't gone. She was bound. To Fiona. She would carry Serena inside her bones, inside her shadow, until death. And even then, who could say where Serena's whisper would travel next? Years later, a child wandering the ruins of the Blackwell grounds found a splintered Ouija board, buried shallow in the dirt, its wood still warm to the touch. The child ran his fingers along its letters, smiling faintly as a voice whispered in his ear, soft, patient. Just say my name. And beneath the soil, the earth shivered, as if something smiled back. The village of Graymore stood in a silence that was not peace but paralysis. Once a place of fishermen, stone cottages, and the constant sound of gulls, it now sat entombed in mist. The sea lapped faintly at the rocky shores, but no boat drifted, no voice rose, no child ran along the coast. The people of Graymore stood exactly where they had been when time stopped. A man paused mid-step carrying a net. A woman held a jug, pouring water forever into an empty pail. Children frozen in play, smiles caught halfway. They did not breathe, did not blink, but their eyes remained open, watching nothing. Above them all hung the red moon, swollen and low, staining the clouds with rust. It did not move across the sky. It simply hung, an eye that never closed. It had been this way since the day Elias Mercer vanished. Elias, the village's bravest diver, had gone into the deep to retrieve bodies lost to the sea, a practice steeped in respect and superstition. But one day, he had dived deeper than ever before, chasing whispers of a creature in the abyss, a thing the old ones called the Hollow Leviathan. He never returned. And the day he vanished, so did the village. Now into this stillness, 3 women arrived. They came by foot, from where none could say, stepping through the mist like shadows made flesh. Selene Blackmore, tall and sharp, her cloak heavy with stitched symbols. Maura Calloway, pale and silent, her eyes clouded yet seeing things others could not. Juniper Vale, young, crowned with vines and earth-stained fingers, carrying satchels of herbs and bones. They said nothing as they entered. They did not need to. The village itself greeted them with its dead air, the fog parting reluctantly. Selene stood in the center square, gazing up at the red moon. "It's as they said," she whispered. "Grief is a door." Moira knelt, pressing her hand to the dirt. It was damp, but not from recent rain. The soil was wet with salt water, as though the sea had bled into the land. Juniper moved among the frozen villagers, touching their hands, their cheeks. She whispered charms, but none stirred. "They're not dead," Juniper murmured, "but they're not living either." Selene turned to her companions. "We must find his trail, the diver, Elias Mercer." They began their search. The houses remained untouched, food left to rot, candles burned to stumps. But dust did not settle here. It was as if the moment of Elias vanishing had pinned the world in place. In the village church, they found Father Aldrich, the priest, standing at the pulpit, mouth open, eyes weeping tears of salt. His pages lay before him, a sermon half finished, ink smudged by moisture. Selene read the words aloud. "Beware the hollow Leviathan, for it feasts not on flesh but on what memory leaves behind. In grief it finds its meal. In the tears of the bereaved it drinks." Moira traced a symbol beneath the pulpit, a curling spiral, older than the church itself. "It was here before the church," she said, "before the village." Juniper gathered strands of seaweed, found inexplicably woven among the pews. "The sea is in the walls," she whispered. At night they did not sleep. The village murmured in the dark, not with voices, but with the sound of waves, lapping beneath the ground, as if the earth had become hollow and water waited just below. The red moon did not move. Selene prepared wards, placing salt lines at doorways. Moira burned herbs that emitted smoke thick and gray, which twisted into shapes resembling faces, mouths opening wide but silent. Juniper gathered bones of seabirds, forming runes around the village square. On the third night, the sea gave a gift. A body. It washed ashore face down, bloated but not decayed. They turned it over. It was Elias Mercer, or what was left of him. His eyes were open, black as the deepest trench, his mouth agape but waterlogged. But his body was dry, no water dripped from him. Selene knelt. "He's a message." Moira placed her hand on his chest. He went down, and what found him was not the sea. That night Selene dreamed. She stood on the shore, the red moon hanging low. From the water rose a shape immense, shadowed, its form not entirely formed. She saw eyes countless watching. She heard breath slow like a tide pulling in. Then a voice, deep and cracking like ice breaking. "You have come too late. The meal is already mine." She awoke with salt on her lips. They buried Elias by the shore, though the ground protested, the earth too soft, the hole filling with brine as they dug. When his body lay in the soil, his eyes remained open. Watching, the witches gathered their knowledge. Selene concluded that the Leviathan was not in the sea, but beneath the village, in the roots of grief, in the pain that saturated the soil. Moira, speaking through her connection with the dead, confirmed that the villagers' grief had become a beacon, and the Leviathan had answered. Juniper observed the moon, noting that it was growing, not moving but swelling, as if drawing closer. "The red moon feeds it," Juniper said. "When it's full, it will swallow us too." Selene nodded. "Then we must go below." Moira looked to the sea. "There are caves," she whispered, "beneath the cliffs, the mouth of the world." And so they prepared. Salt, bone, blood, light, all the tools they would need to face what no living eyes should see. As they descended toward the caves, the villagers behind them remained still. But if one listened closely, beneath the wind, beneath the waves, the frozen villagers began to hum softly, in unison, mouths barely parted, as if singing to the thing that slept below. Waiting. The entrance to the sea caves lay hidden beneath a crumbling cliffside, where the ocean carved deep, black mouths into the stone. The tide whispered in and out, as if uncertain whether to swallow the cliffs whole or keep its secrets hidden a while longer. The three witches, Selene, Moira, and Juniper, stood before the opening, a hollow wound in the earth, darkness breathing against their skin. The red moon hung behind them, casting the cliffs in a dull, red pallor. No stars accompanied it, only cloud, heavy and unmoving. The air reeked of salt and old blood. Selene, clutching a lantern infused with witchlight, stepped forward. "This is the mouth." Moira pressed her palm to the stone, feeling it pulse faintly beneath her fingers. "It's awake," she whispered. "It knows." Juniper scattered salt behind them, binding the path they would tread. "We go forward," she said. "No turning back." They entered. The cave swallowed sound. The only noise was the sea's breath, distant but constant, a slow, labored inhale and exhale. The walls dripped with moisture, but beneath the water was flesh, veins of dark material like sinew, pulsing faintly, too rhythmic to be rock alone. They walked deeper, the light of the lantern a fragile bubble in the dark. Then the whispers began. Low, indistinct, like voices from behind a wall. Selene paused, listening. "Do you hear them?" Moira nodded, eyes distant. "They're calling us by name." Juniper frowned. "They shouldn't know us." Further in, they reached a wide cavern where the floor was submerged in dark water. In the center stood a figure. A man, still upright, facing away. They approached slowly, salt charms in hand. As they neared, the figure turned. It was Elias Mercer. But his face was wrong, stretched thin, his eyes black and endless, his mouth slightly open but no breath within. Yet he smiled faintly. "You followed me," he whispered. Selene raised the lantern. "We seek the Leviathan." Elias chuckled, a sound like stones grinding. "You've already found it." The walls seemed to breathe then, slow and heavy. The water shivered. Moira stepped forward. "Why did you go so deep?" Elias' head tilted, neck cracking. "Because I was tired of grief. The sea offered forgetting, to be nothing, to be consumed." Juniper's voice trembled. "You gave yourself to it." Elias smiled wider. "I was the first in years, but not the last." The water rippled. Beneath it, shapes moved slow, massive, like whales beneath ice. But these shapes had too many limbs, too many eyes. Moira shuddered. "We need to pass." Elias nodded. "Then you must give a memory." Selene stepped forward. "What memory?" Elias' voice was soft. "Your first grief, the first thing that broke you. The Leviathan feeds on those." Silence hung, heavy and suffocating. Selene closed her eyes, remembering a child's face, drowned, her first loss. She spoke the name aloud, and as she did, a piece of her breath turned to mist, vanishing into the dark. Elias smiled, stepped aside. "You may pass." Moira and Juniper followed, each whispering a name, a loss. The cave drank their sorrow, the air warmer for it. They passed deeper, the tunnel narrowing. Then the sound changed. A heartbeat. Slow, immense, shaking the stone. They emerged into a cavern vast and open, the ceiling lost in shadow. And there, half submerged in black water, was the hollow Leviathan. It was no single form, but a mass of eyes, mouths, and endless limbs, shifting and folding into itself, as though the sea had birthed a god and abandoned it. Its eyes, thousands of them, opened at once. The witches froze. Then a voice, deep as the ocean floor. "You brought more grief, feed me." Selene raised her lantern, its light flickering, barely holding. Moira whispered, "We must bind it." But the Leviathan moved, the water surged, limbs rising. Moira screamed, struck by a shadowed tendril thrown against the stone. Blood spilled, salt water wept from her wounds. Juniper scattered salt, the grains sizzling as they touched the water. Selene chanted, a binding in an old tongue, but the Leviathan laughed. Salt is for flesh, I am sorrow, I cannot rot. The cavern trembled. Elia stood by the edge, watching, neither alive nor dead. You cannot win, he whispered, not here. Moira gasped, then where? Elia's black eyes gleamed. Where the red moon bleeds, bring it to the surface, make it flesh. Selene understood. We must leave, she cried. Juniper grabbed Moira, dragging her bleeding form. Selene led the way, the Leviathan's limbs thrashing, trying to close the path. They barely escaped, the cave collapsing behind them. Outside, the red moon loomed, pulsing faintly. Moira coughed, her blood tinged with salt. We can't fight it down there. Selene nodded grimly. We bring it here, where it can die. But as they looked back, the cave still whispered. I am already here. The witches had returned from the depths, but they did not come back whole. The caves beneath Greymore remained alive behind the crumbled stone, a prison that did not hold its captive. For the hollow Leviathan was not a creature of space. It was sorrow incarnate, and its reach was everywhere grief lingered. The red moon swelled, its glow deepening from red to a sickly crimson that bled into the sea, the water now stained like old blood. The villagers remained frozen, yet some had changed. Their eyes, once dull, now glimmered faintly red. At night, their mouths opened just slightly, and though no breath came, a sound hummed low like the groaning of a distant, unseen tide. The witches gathered in the church, beneath the rotting beams and salt-streaked walls. Moira, her body weak and bleeding salt, barely stood. Her shadow, even in candlelight, moved independently, curling in shapes foreign and wrong. Selene Blackmore pored over Father Aldrich's books, scrawled margins of occult warnings, and rites too dangerous for the living. Juniper Vale, her hands raw from salt burns, whispered to the plants outside, but the earth refused to answer. The soil was turning to brine. We cannot kill it where it sleeps, Selene said. But if we summon it, if we make it walk upon the land, it can bleed. Moira gasped, her voice hollow. If we summon it here, it will devour everything. Juniper looked out the church window, watching the sea rise higher than it should. It already is. Selene revealed the ritual, the calling of the tide that waits, a forbidden spell meant to draw beings from the veil into mortal flesh. It demanded a lure, a life bound to the Leviathan's heart. All three knew. Moira, already marked, already half-claimed, would be the bait. That night the village stirred. The red moon pulsed as if breathing. The villagers' limbs twitched subtly, fingers clenching and relaxing, heads turning fractionally, puppets awaiting strings. The witches drew the summoning circle in the village square, salt mixed with bone dust, symbols that writhed faintly when traced. Moira stood in the center, a vessel willingly given. As Selene chanted, the air grew heavy, the sky sagging closer. Juniper played her part, binding charms to the villagers' feet, to keep them grounded should the Leviathan try to claim them. Then the ground shuddered. The sea rose unnaturally, spilling over the cliffs, yet no wave broke, the water simply climbed, like a creature crawling upward. From the water's surface, shadows emerged, limbs like ropes, eyes blinking in clusters, mouths opening to scream without sound. Then came the voice. I come where I am mourned. The Leviathan's form breached not fully, but enough to darken the sky. A mass of shadow and form, too vast to comprehend, limbs dragging along the ground, its eyes like moons within moons. The summoning worked. But not all went to plan. The villagers moved, not awake but driven. They walked toward the Leviathan, their mouths humming, their bodies shedding tears of salt. Moira's body glowed faintly, her veins alight, pulling the Leviathan closer. Selene shouted the final invocation, but the Leviathan roared, a sound like a tsunami colliding with mountains, and the circle cracked. Salt scattered. The bindings weakened. Juniper ran to repair the symbols, but the Leviathan struck, a shadow tendril smashing the ground, splitting stone. Moira collapsed, her body twisting, her voice a whisper. "Finish it." Selene, desperate, lit the final flame, a conjured fire that would either banish or consume all. The Leviathan's eyes turned to her, thousands of them, each seeing her grief, her pain. It whispered her dead child's name. Selene faltered, but Juniper grabbed her hand, steadying it. Together they cast the flame, the fire surged, white and cold, striking the Leviathan's mass. It screamed, the sound rupturing stone, shattering windows. Its body retreated, burning but not gone. It whispered as it sank, "I am not dead, I am tide, and the tide returns." The sea withdrew, leaving the village soaked but standing. Moira lay dying, her body failing, but she smiled faintly. "You made it bleed." The red moon remained, but slightly dimmer. Selene knelt, promising they would finish it. But beneath the soil, beneath the sea, the Leviathan stirred, wounded but waiting. Because no tide retreats forever. The village of Greymore stood bruised and trembling under the ever-watching red moon, though a faint change had begun. The moon's glow, once heavy and suffocating, now pulsed as if it too had been wounded. The hollow Leviathan had been driven back, but its shadow remained. The witches gathered inside the skeletal remains of the village church, walls warped by salt and time, the air forever damp with brine. The floor, once stone, was now slick with a thin film of seawater, never drying. Moira Calloway lay upon a bed of dried seaweed and cloth, her skin translucent, her veins a road map of salt. She bled from her eyes, her tears more salt than water, her breathing shallow. Her shadow no longer mimicked her. It moved with intentions not her own, curling against the stone like a parasite waiting for the right moment to separate. Each night the shadow grew bolder. Selene Blackmore stood vigil, her hands stained with ash from repeated warding spells that barely held back the corruption. She read by candlelight, the pages of Evelyn Darkmore's forbidden grimoire threatening to disintegrate with each turn. There, she found the final incantation, the severance of tide, a ritual to banish a Leviathan fully, but the price was steep. It demanded a soul given freely to the sea, a life bound to grief, a willing sacrifice. Selene looked to Moira and knew. The choice had been made the day they set foot in Greymore. Juniper Vale, ever tending to the soil and roots, found herself increasingly ignored by the land. The earth rejected her touch, the plants shriveled before her eyes. The Leviathan's presence had poisoned everything it touched. In the nights the villagers stirred more visibly. Their fingers twitched, mouths opened in silent screams, and when Juniper pressed her ear to their chests, she heard not heartbeats, but the slow crashing of distant waves. The village was still sinking, not into the earth, but into the Leviathan's grasp. The witches worked quickly. The ritual required 3 elements. 1. Blood of the bound, the marked one, Moira. 2. Salt of the living, gathered from the tears of the statuesque villagers. 3. Bone of the forgotten, a relic from the first to die in the Leviathan's hunger. Selene harvested salt by pressing cloths to the villagers' cheeks, their eyes leaking salt water when the red moon rose high. Juniper ventured into the graveyard, searching for the oldest grave, a child, nameless, her bones brittle but whole. With each item gathered, the red moon grew more feverish, its light a deeper crimson. On the final night, the sea began to rise unbidden, even as the sky remained clear. Water crept through the village's narrow streets, touching doorframes, climbing stairs without waves. Mora stirred, her voice a ragged whisper. "He's coming." Selene prepared the circle in the church, the symbols drawn in blood, salt, and powdered bone. The wards vibrated, each sigil a wound in reality, sensitive to the Leviathan's presence. As the ritual began, Mora stood, frail, her bones creaking, her shadow now fully detached, looming at her side. Selene and Juniper chanted, their voices weaving the severance. The church walls groaned, the windows running with salt water, as if the building itself wept in anticipation. Then the Leviathan answered. The floor split, a chasm of endless dark, the sea beneath the church clawing upward. From the pit, limbs of shadow emerged, eyes blinking into existence. The hollow Leviathan spoke, not aloud, but in every crack of stone, every shudder of the earth. "Grief binds you, grief binds me, release her and I recede." Mora stepped forward, barefoot, her body nearly translucent, veins glimmering under her skin. Selene reached for her, but Mora smiled faintly. "I was always meant to feed the sea." She stepped into the pit, her body dissolving into salt and mist as she sank. The Leviathan roared, not in victory but in pain. The ritual burned bright, the light of the circle flared, consuming the pit, sealing the Leviathan's shadow beneath layers of warded earth and bone. The sea receded, the walls of the church collapsing, but the ground held. When the dawn threatened to rise, the red moon finally dimmed, its glow weak, no longer bleeding. Selene and Juniper stood among the ruins, the villagers still statues, but their faces now calm, no longer weeping. The Leviathan was banished for now. But the sea whispered still. The waves lapped hungrily, as if waiting for new grief to flavor the tides. Selene whispered into the wind. "We severed you, but grief always returns." Greymore slept lightly beneath the fatting gaze of the red moon, though sleep was not peace. The villagers stood unchanged, statues of grief, but beneath the earth something stirred. The hollow Leviathan, though wounded by the severance ritual, was not slain. It waited, vast and slow, a god of sorrow that could not die so long as grief lived in the world above. The witches, Selene Blackmore and Juniper Vale, knew this. They stood in the ruins of the church, their bodies brittle, their minds heavy with the residue of spells cast too often. Mora's sacrifice had bought them time, but the Leviathan still whispered. At night, Selene heard it in the waves. "You starved me, but I remember you." The village trembled under a new threat. The red moon, once receding, now pulsed, leaking light like a wound reopening. The sea itself began to climb again, not with waves, but with an impossible, steady rise of water that hungered. Juniper, tending to the wardstones that remained around the village perimeter, noticed the soil darkening, not with rain, but with brine. The land was sick, rejecting life. Selene discovered in Evelyn Darkmore's remaining notes that the Leviathan could only be truly ended by one final act, the offering of the living soul, a spell that required the living heart of a witch willingly given to the sea. She said nothing to Juniper at first, but the days grew shorter, the moon brighter, the sea louder. One night the water breached the village square. It was not just water, it was alive. Limbs of shadow writhed beneath the surface, eyes opened in the foam, mouths whispered names. Selene and Juniper stood back to back, spells on their lips, knowing they could only delay the inevitable. Then the Leviathan spoke, its voice rising not from the sea, but from the mouths of the frozen villagers, speaking in unison. "Give me your grief, and I will sleep again." Selene realized then that her grief was not enough, but Juniper's, still unspoken, was a feast the Leviathan craved. She confronted Juniper by the cliffs, the sea clawing below. "What did you lose?" Selene asked. Juniper's eyes filled with tears she'd never shed. "A child," Juniper whispered, "long ago taken by the sea." Selene nodded. "Then it's you." But Juniper shook her head. "No, I won't feed it, I'll end it." She turned to the sea, her hands bleeding from carving symbols into her own flesh, a living grimoire. Selene cried out, but Juniper smiled. "We end grief by carrying it, not by surrendering to it." She stepped forward, chanting, her body glowing faintly, the marks on her skin burning with light. The sea roared, the Leviathan rising, a mass of shadows, limbs, eyes, and mouths, all reaching. Juniper raised her hands, the light bursting from her chest, a pure white flame. "I give you nothing," she said. "I sever you." The light struck the Leviathan, burning its form, its voice a scream that shook the cliffs. Selene watched, tears blurring her sight, as Juniper's body crumbled into salt, her sacrifice pure. The Leviathan collapsed, its body dissolving, the sea retreating, the red moon fading to a dull, bloodless orb. Graymore was still. The villagers remained statues, but their faces no longer wept. Selene stood alone on the cliffs, the waves gentle below. The Leviathan was gone, but the sea never forgets. And neither did she. The red moon receded at last, its once bloated form dimming into a pale memory against the sky. For the first time in what seemed like centuries, dawn threatened to rise over the village of Graymore. Yet morning was not a promise. The village stood unchanged. The villagers remained statues, their eyes now dry, their bodies still mid-motion, frozen where grief had seized them. But the air was different, no longer heavy with salt, no longer echoing with the breath of the hollow Leviathan. Only Selene Blackmore remained, the last of the witches. She stood where Juniper Vale had vanished, her friend, her ally, her sacrifice. The cliffs bore no trace of her, only salt in the cracks of stone, the smell of brine that would never wash away. Selene wandered the village in silence. She touched each villager gently, as if waiting for warmth to return to their skin. But they remained cold, locked in their last moments. The sea, too, was silent, lapping gently against the shore, pretending innocence. Selene returned to the ruins of the church, where the remnants of spells and wards lay like broken bones. She gathered the pieces of Evelyn Darkmoor's grimoires, though most were useless now, the ink run, the pages brittle. There was no spell to restore the village. But Selene still heard the faintest whisper on the wind, the voice of the Leviathan, not gone, but distant. "Where sorrow lives, I will wait." She knew it was the truth. The Leviathan was banished, but not dead. No creature born of grief ever truly dies. It sinks, it sleeps, but it waits for another place, another heart heavy enough to call it forth. Selene gathered her things, her tools, her satchels of herbs and bone. She carried the last of Juniper's belongings, a carved piece of driftwood in the shape of a crescent moon. As the pale light of morning finally cracked the horizon, she walked away from Graymore, her shadow long behind her. She left the villagers as they were, not because she didn't care, but because some curses cannot be undone. Some griefs are too deep. At the village's edge, Selene whispered to herself, "We severed you, but grief is the oldest god." The sun rose, weak but real. Behind her the village stood quiet, but deep beneath the soil, beneath the sea, where no light could reach, something still shifted, patient, knowing the tide always returns. And in the final light before morning, if one listened closely, the waves whispered names of the lost, waiting for the next call.